Chapter 464. As soon as everyone returned to Earth, the Empress went straight to her room to take a bath. It was too smelly, and she couldn't stand the stench anymore. Renbaqian, Lin Chaola, Qing Yuan, and Hong Wuan vomited all over the floor. Wretch! The sound of vomiting echoed throughout the house. Lin Chaola was vomiting and crying at the same time. She cried and vomited at the same time. She was heartbroken. She had never suffered such a serious injury in her life. The stench was even more damaging to her than having a hole in her abdomen and legs twisted into a fried dough twist. This place is, wretch. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan asked while vomiting. Follow me, wretch. Renbaqian vomited as he dragged Lin Chaola to the swimming pool and threw her in. Lin Chaola immediately jumped out after falling into the water. She didn't seem to like water, but when she smelled the stench on the shore, she cried and jumped back in again. She held the edge of the swimming pool tightly. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan didn't need Renbaqian's instructions. They jumped into the pool themselves and wanted to wash off the stench. Renbaqian threw them into the swimming pool and felt suffocated. He quickly ran back to his room to take a bath. After half an hour, all kinds of screams and the Empress's angry roars could be heard from all over the house. He couldn't wash off the stench even after taking a bath. Renbaqian shuddered as he tried his best to wash off the stench on his body. The Empress's voice seemed to be very angry. Would she vent her anger on him? After thinking about it carefully, the Empress didn't seem to need to vent her anger on him since he was one of the main culprits. However, there were a few people in front of him. They were the ones who made the smoke grenades and gave them to him. Bang! Hearing the loud noise from the Empress's room, Renbaqian ran out naked to check on his phone to see if there was anything that could remove the concentrated skunk musk. Before he could find anything, the Empress rushed in with a bath towel wrapped around her. She didn't even look at him and rushed straight into the bathroom, leaving a dumbfounded Renbaqian behind. He went to the Empress's room to take a look and heard the sound of water splashing as soon as he entered. Renbaqian looked out and saw that the shower and the bathroom had been dismantled by the Empress into a pile of parts. This showed how angry the Empress was at this moment. Renbaqian hurriedly gave Yangsen a call. It was this damned fellow who gave him that batch of things. What he wanted was something powerful that could save the situation at a critical moment. This thing was indeed very powerful, much more powerful than he had expected. However, the side effects were also very powerful, much more powerful than he had expected. This was simply perishing together with the enemy. How do I wash away the smell of that thing? Renbaqian asked while gritting his teeth. You're infected. Yangsen asked. How do we wash it off? Renbaqian flew into a rage. Didn't I tell you last time? Time will solve everything. I want it now. I'm going to suffocate. Renbaqian said fiercely. He was really going to suffocate. Even after such a long time, his nose still hadn't gotten used to this smell. It was constantly being attacked both physically and mentally. You can try vinegar, detergent, and tomatoes, Yangsen said. After he finished speaking, Renbaqian hung up the phone. Yangsen put down the phone and laughed. He finally saw that guy suffer a setback. Just like what he said, time would solve everything. At least in the laboratory, there wasn't a good solution. This damned smell could only be solved with time. Even ordinary skunk musk was very difficult to remove and required more than 3 days, let alone this concentrated one. Its power was increased by several times. The duration was also, after he called Shenfeng, the Empress appeared in front of him in a bathrobe and retreated to the door in disgust. The smell on Renbaqian's body was too strong. Of course, it was the same for her. However, when the two of them were together, the smell seemed to be much stronger. The Empress's eyes were red. How can I get rid of the smell? Ugh! She didn't even care about the excruciating pain she felt after recovering from that state. "Your Majesty, please wait for a moment. I have already sent someone to deliver the things," Rinpoche said. He prayed that those things would be useful. He felt that the Empress was going crazy. Who did it? The Empress's eyes were red and overflowing with murderous intent. She had made up her mind that she wouldn't let that guy die too easily. She definitely wouldn't let him die an easy death. She must suppress him in front of the palace for thousands of years. Rinpoche was speechless. "Your Majesty, let's talk about this after the smell is washed off. Why don't you go in and soak for a while? At least you will feel better after soaking in the water." After the Empress left, Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. The Empress was going crazy. If she found out that he was the one who did it, he would probably be in big trouble. Who knew that this thing was so powerful? After all, he had only heard about it and hadn't experienced it personally. He definitely couldn't understand the feeling of being surrounded by this kind of stench. An hour later, Shenfeng opened the door and quickly retreated as if she was struck by lightning. She left the 2 boxes in front of Rinpoche's door, quickly escaped to the car, and gave Rinpoche a call. Rinpoche quickly took out the boxes and divided the contents into 3 parts: the Empress, himself, and Lin Chaola. After an hour, Rinpoche sadly discovered that these things were useless. Boom. The bricks in front of Rinpoche were sent flying. Lin Chaola rushed in with red and teary eyes and clawed at Rinpoche's face. "Bastard! I'll fight it out with you." Lin Chaola finally knew that this bastard was the culprit. Boom. Boom. There were 2 consecutive loud noises. The Empress broke through the wall of Rinpoche's bathroom and sent Lin Chaola flying with a punch. Overflowing with murderous intent, she said, "If you hit him, I'll kill you first. I'm going to fight it out with that bastard. It's all that bastard's doing." Ugh. Upon hearing this, the murderous Empress's face immediately darkened. She looked at Rinpoche coldly and asked, "You did it?" Rinpoche immediately broke out in a cold sweat. "Your Majesty, I've sweated for the country. I've bled for the front line." 5 minutes later, Rinpoche had a big bump on his head and claw marks all over his face. He was wearing only a pair of underpants and was tied up and hung outside the window. He wondered if he should give up on young senator, thinking about the consequences. He was afraid that the Messier 87 department would be massacred by the Empress. Forget it, it was better to bear it himself. Otherwise, something big would definitely happen. Who asked him to be stubborn? He was a stubborn person. This is life. After hanging outside the window for a day, Rinpoche felt that the smell wasn't that bad. It was just a little like the smell of rotting animal corpses soaked together with feces from the open-air toilets in summer. Although he had never smelled rotting animal corpses before, the smell made him feel like he was soaking in a pool filled with those things. Well, the smell was a little terrible. Ugh, he recalled his lost youth while feeling nauseous. After an unknown amount of time, he finally heard the window above him open. "Your Majesty, I've bled for the country. Everything I've done is for your Majesty." Your Majesty. What's in your hand? Where did you get the whip from? Ah. Oh. On Mount Wu, an old man was sitting cross-legged on a rock by the stream. "Master, I've brought you medicine and a change of clothes," 2 young disciples shouted from afar. "Come over and talk. Why are you standing so far away?" The old man opened his eyes and a glint flashed across them. "Master, this is fine." The 2 disciples smiled awkwardly. Previously, the 2 of them didn't take it seriously and almost fainted. After experiencing it once, the 2 of them really didn't want to experience it again. Public morals are degenerating with each passing day. A trace of sorrow flashed across the old man's face. "Wasn't it just a little smelly? Just as he thought of this, a gust of wind blew past, and his stomach churned again. Ugh, there were many people who had the same experience as him. One had to know that those who were afflicted were at least at the earth will level. Almost all of them were old experts or higher-ups from various sections. When had they ever encountered such an encounter, smelled such a stench, and suffered like this? This smell had exceeded the limits of what humans could tolerate. Killing people was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. Now, with this stench on their bodies, the wind could blow for 300 meters. Not to mention others, even their own disciples weren't willing to be near them. Even they despised themselves. Chapter 465. In the villa, Renbaqian, the Empress, Lin Chaola, Qing Yuan, and Hong Yuan each wore a gas mask. This was the idea that Renbaqian came up with after being beaten up. The two sides of the mask were covered with activated charcoal that could filter out some of the odor. Although it couldn't completely eliminate the stench, it could reduce it by half. In addition, the smell had lessened over the past few days, and they were more or less used to it. As a result, they didn't feel so bad anymore. Except for Lin Chaola, who was still crying from time to time. It wasn't that she wanted to cry, but that the smell made her cry uncontrollably as if her tear ducts had been stimulated. Your Majesty, we will go back in the afternoon. I don't know if they are still outside. How is Her Majesty's recovery? Renbaqian's voice sounded a little muffled when he spoke through the mask. According to his calculations, by the time they returned, Shiwanya would be almost there, at most half a day to a day later. Therefore, it was hard to say whether they would see the experts from Tianjing Basin or Shiwanya. Even if I have half of my strength left, they still can't fight against me, the Empress said casually with great confidence in herself. But Your Majesty, you don't even have half of your strength now, Lin Chaola said faintly while crying. Lin Chaola said faintly while crying. Those who didn't know would think that she was very sad. In fact, she was really sad, so sad that her tears formed a river. These days, she couldn't eat or sleep well, and her originally flat figure became even flatter. After a few days of tears, there was a large red patch around her eyes, similar to a walnut. The Empress glared at her coldly. Your Majesty. Renbaqian was shocked. He really didn't know that the Empress's strength had been greatly reduced. The Empress's wounds had almost healed over the past few days, and even Lin Chaola's twisted legs were mostly healed due to her strong recovery ability. However, the burden on her body from burning her essence blood couldn't be recovered in a short period of time. I'm fine. I will be fine after a few days of rest, the Empress said indifferently. What if they are still there when we return? Renbaqian couldn't help but worry. If the Empress was in good condition, it would be a tough fight against 11 Spirit Will experts and more than 500 Earth Will experts with Lin Chaola's help. If the Empress's strength wasn't even half of her peak, it would be somewhat dangerous. My strength isn't something you can measure, the Water Empress said coldly. This sentence included all the experts in Tianjing Basin, including Renbaqian and Lin Chaola. I don't know about other things, but Your Majesty, you only have 30% of your strength left. Lin Chaola continued to cry and yawn as she exposed the Empress's past. The Empress's face darkened. She glared at Lin Chaola, clenched her teeth, and really wanted to slap her to death. Renbaqian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why are you still so stubborn at this juncture? Your Majesty, there are still some added smoke bombs. Renbaqian cautiously suggested. For the sake of these damned smoke bombs, the Empress had been looking at him in exasperation these past 2 days. If it was someone else, they would have been slapped to death by her. How dare you? The Empress's eyes were filled with murderous intent. No. Lin Chaola immediately jumped up from the ground. Your Majesty, please be patient for the sake of your safety. Besides, don't you have a gas mask now? I'd rather die. The Empress exuded a murderous aura. Your Majesty, think about your unborn child, Pa. Bang! Renbochin used a lot of effort to get down from the wall. His gas mask was broken and stuck to his face. Ugh. Without the gas mask, Renbochin felt that the stench in the room immediately became stronger. After half a day, Renbochin was shot into the wall 6 times. This finally made the Empress soften a little. She gritted her teeth and tearfully acquiesced to Renbochin's plan to bring the remaining smoke bombs with him and use them if the situation became dangerous. With her pride, she acquiesced to Renbochin's plan because she was a little soft-hearted after seeing Renbochin's bloody nose and swollen face. On the other hand, Lin Xiaolo was grinding her teeth and had the intention to bite Renbochin to death. However, what comforted everyone was that there was still a gas mask that could reduce the stench by half. This comfort came from Renbochin's words. You and your opponent fell into a pit filled with hot feces. You have a gas mask, but your opponent doesn't. What a blessing. The strength of both parties is also at an equal level. After all, the power of this smoke bomb isn't weaker than any biological weapon of mass destruction. Of course, the price was that Renbochin was shot into the wall for the 6th time. There was a reason why Renbochin was shot into the wall 6 times. Early morning, Wu City. Since yesterday, there had been an unbearable stench in Wu City. Especially this morning, this stench had reached its peak. The entire warlord's residence was surrounded by this stench, which was like a mixture of rotting corpses and hot feces. The guards and maids in the warlord's residence were about to faint. Damn it, I can't take it anymore, someone cursed. If you think about it, it won't be there. If you think about it, it will naturally come. Wretch. Another old man's identity as an expert didn't last long. The stench has weakened a little, but it should be better in a few days. Why do I feel that it's heavier? It's because there are too many people here. When we catch that bastard, we must skin him and hang him on the city wall to let him die under the scorching sun, someone said hatefully. Will Qi Zixiao come back? How did they disappear? Everyone was puzzled and couldn't find an answer. Qi Zixiao had disappeared for a day, and no one knew where she went. No one knew if she would return or how she did it. Let's think about how to deal with Shi Wanya first. If Qi Zixiao dies and Shi Wanya is annihilated here, the gate to Tianjing Basin will be opened. However, now that Qi Zixiao has disappeared and hasn't been seen for a day, we have to force Shi Wanya to retreat first before letting people search the entire Tianjing Basin. I don't believe that they really disappeared without a trace. The news of Shi Wanya entering Tianjing Basin with 3,000 soldiers naturally couldn't be hidden. Previously, everyone's thoughts were on Qi Zixiao and wanted to surround and kill her. Then, they would use her head to confuse Shi Wanya's army and defeat the other party. However, at this time, Qi Zixiao was missing and Shi Wanya's army had broken through several obstacles at a speed that exceeded everyone's expectations and was approaching Wu City. Everyone had to face this problem, which was also the reason why they gathered here. After 2 hours, everyone finally finished their discussion and fled. With so many people gathered in one place, the stench was enough to make one's vision go dark. They wanted to search for Qi Zixiao, keep people on Mount Wu, and stop Shi Wanya's troops. However, the main problem was the army led by Shi Wanya. Only the fastest spirit will expert and dozens of earth will experts were left on Mount Wu to monitor and prevent Qi Zixiao from appearing. However, everyone didn't have high hopes for this. Perhaps Qi Zixiao was already thousands of kilometers away. Chapter 466. This day wasn't a good memory for the people of Wu City. That was because a pungent stench that made people want to vomit could be smelled from every corner of the city since the morning, causing many of the citizens of Wu City to silently curse. Only a few people knew that this stench was brought back by the experts who came down from Mount Wu. However, no one dared to say anything. After all, each of those experts was a well-known figure in Tianjin Basin. The North Alliance, the Southern Metropolis, the Green Bellflower, the Lingshan sect, the Golden Ring residents. These people covered all the major powers in Tianjin Basin. Therefore, if those who knew didn't say anything, ordinary people wouldn't know what exactly happened. It wasn't until the afternoon that everyone in Wu City could feel the earth trembling. Standing on the city wall, one could see a large number of cavalrymen flooding toward Wu City along the dirt road outside the city like a tide. When they sensed the tremors coming from the ground, many experts immediately appeared from all over the city. They either walked through the crowd or scurried on the rooftops to reach the city wall. Wretch! Wretch! When a group of people gathered together, the originally faint stench immediately became extremely strong. You guys stay here. I'm getting old and will go back to rest first. Goodbye. Many people left one after another. Most of those who left were experts who lived in seclusion, and those who stayed were people from the major powers. There were also the soldiers who almost fainted on the city wall. They held their breaths and occasionally inhaled a mouthful of fresh air that was filled with the smell while looking into the distance with a black face. After half an hour, the tide finally stopped a few kilometers away from Wu City. Everyone could almost see the faces of the cavalrymen in front of them. They were tall and fierce-looking aboriginal warriors who were half-dressed and had strong upper bodies. However, they couldn't hide the fatigue on their faces, and there were many new wounds on their bodies. In 9.5 days, they rushed from Goose City to Wu City and broke through 5 interceptions during this period. A few flags embroidered with the words, Nan Fu, and Sheath fluttered among the troops. As soon as the troops stopped, the cavalrymen dispersed to both sides. A general riding on a saber-toothed tiger came to the front of the formation and looked up at the people on the city wall. Just by sitting on the saber-toothed tiger's back, one could feel a bloody and murderous aura. Everyone felt as if they were on a battlefield, surrounded by a sea of blood and facing a man who was like a god of death. Shi Wanya. The people on the city wall immediately recognized him. Although many people hadn't seen him face to face, they immediately recognized him. In Renbachian's eyes, Shi Wanya had a square face and was a handsome aboriginal. However, in the eyes of the people of Tianjin Basin, he was a butcher with a butcher's knife. Where's her? Shi Wanya's voice was like thunder, spanning several miles and covering the entire northern part of Wu City. Qi Zixiao is dead and Dayo is about to perish. Aren't you all going back to prepare for your funeral? Qing Yun's sword said in a clear voice. Since Qi Zixiao was nowhere to be found, they would first disrupt the enemy's morale and lure them into attacking the city. Then, they would kill Shi Wanya and his cavalry outside of Wu City. If it, Fu, he yunt, he said, he, rent, he, would say, the Qing. Once they were out of Tianjin Basin, half of the south of Dayo would be in chaos. With the Yun nation and the Qin nation as support, the barbarians would definitely be badly battered. As soon as he finished speaking, Shi Wanya's murderous aura erupted like a volcano eruption. The murderous aura was so concentrated that it was almost tangible. With him as the center, it swept out in all directions. The cavalrymen behind him retreated one after another, and their mounts couldn't even stand steadily. Even the people on the city wall were secretly shocked. Rest for half an hour. Break into the city, slaughter everyone, and leave no one alive. Shi Wanya's thunderous voice resounded throughout the world. Kill! The cavalrymen behind him were overflowing with murderous aura as they shouted. Then, they dismounted and seized the time to rest. Where's Her Majesty? Shi Wanya's voice sounded again. How could there be a corpse left after killing an expert like Qi Zixiao? There's nothing left of him. Qing Yun's sword said. Humph, you scum and trash. How could you harm Her Majesty? However, since you dared to say that you would kill Her Majesty, none of you will be spared. The blood of the whole city will be the price for your words. Shiwanya's voice was full of contempt. What kind of person was Her Majesty? How could she be harmed by these people? He didn't believe Qingyun Sword's words at all. These people dared to say such words, which was the greatest insult to Her Majesty. They would die for insulting Her Majesty. Slaughter the whole city as a warning to others and let everyone see the consequences. They would kill them first and then slowly search for Her Majesty's whereabouts. In addition, Rinpoche had sent a letter saying that all the experts of Tianjing Basin were gathered here. After killing them, Tianjing Basin would no longer have the power to rebel. As for Her Majesty's safety, all the experts of Tianjing Basin were gathered here. As long as they were killed, who else could harm Her Majesty? As a general, Shiwanya wasn't the kind of person who could foresee everything. As the Protector General of the South, he wasn't able to see through people's minds. He had his own way of dealing with the enemy and controlling them. Naturally, there wouldn't be any mistakes after killing all the people who could pose a threat and have the ability to rebel. Shiwanya's words were exactly what everyone in the city wanted. All the experts of Tianjing Basin were gathered in the city. There were 10 spirit will experts, 500 earth will experts, and more than 1,000 man will experts from various sections. Facing Shiwanya, who had come from afar, and defending the city with such strength, they would bleed to death at the top of the city wall. Both sides had absolute confidence in their own strength and were determined to kill each other. After half an hour, without waiting for Shiwanya's order, many of the cavalrymen at the back stood up and gripped their weapons tightly. All of them were silent. Other than the sound of weapons colliding, there was almost no other sound. Slaughter them all. Shiwanya waved his hand. Kill. Many soldiers roared, grabbed their weapons, and rushed toward the city wall. In addition to the weapons in their hands, everyone was carrying a bone spear. This was something that Rinpoche hadn't seen before in the war in the north. Throw. Buzz. More than 2,000 people threw their bone spears at the same time, making a loud noise. A large number of bone spears reflected the sunlight and covered the top of the city wall like a cloud. Boom! A huge umbrella unfolded in front of the bone spears. Hundreds of bone spears immediately hit the umbrella and turned into countless broken bones. Qingyun's sword pointed his finger, and the long sword behind him floated in the air, sprinkling countless sword gleams onto the bone spears. Dozens of figures rushed into the sky and blocked the bone spears with dazzling sword gleams and sword gleams. Stubborn resistance. Shiwanya snorted coldly, took the long-handled broadsword from the back of the saber-toothed tiger, and suddenly disappeared. After a few flashes, Shiwanya jumped up with an overbearing sword gleam in his hand. It was as if he was going to split the heaven and earth apart. A figure that faced the bone spear immediately exploded into flesh and blood that filled the sky. At the same time, 2 other people's auras soared into the sky, leaped from behind the cavalrymen, and rushed toward the top of the city wall. 3 cardinal heaven experts from the Protectorate of the South attacked at the same time. On Mount Wu, there was a fluctuation in the air where the Empress and the others had disappeared. 3 people wearing strange masks appeared out of thin air as if they had been squeezed out of it. Although they were wearing gas masks and had changed their clothes, the people who stayed on Wushan Mountain immediately discovered and recognized them. Chapter 467. Shiwanya slashed with his saber, and a person in the air turned into a rain of blood. Qingyun's sword changed its direction, and the sword in the air seemed to transcend time and space and arrived in front of Shiwanya in a few tenths of a second. Clang! Shiwanya waved the long saber in his hand and parried the long sword that was flying towards him. The long sword seemed to be controlled by an invisible hand as it made a turn and attacked Shiwanya again, creating many silver flowers in the air. Shiwanya held the saber hilt in his hand, and a bright light flashed in the air again. The silver flowers in the air immediately disappeared. Only Shiwanya held the saber on his back and descended toward the top of the city wall. Good move. I don't believe that you are more powerful than Qi Zhixiao, a voice shouted as a person rode a spear and turned into a long dragon that soared into the sky. There was a series of sounds of weapons colliding in the air. Following which, a person was smashed into the ground, creating a big pit. Shiwanya was also bounced up by the force of the collision. This famous butcher's face was as black as charcoal in the air. Although the strength of the person just now wasn't bad, it wasn't strength that was important. It was that he was too smelly. It was so smelly that even Shiwanya couldn't help but want to curse. He even suspected that this person had soaked in the hot feces for an entire day just to disgust him. Were the spirit will experts of Tianjing Basin like this? When he landed, another 2 spirit will experts came up to meet him. Then, that fresh smell kept drilling into Shiwanya's nose, making his face as black as the bottom of a pot. He couldn't help but want to curse. As for the Deputy Protector General of the Protectorate of the South and another general, they started cursing as soon as they started fighting. Did you fall into a cesspit? Are you trying to stink me to death? Upon hearing this, Shiwanya's mind suddenly flashed. Could this be the reason why these spirit will experts from Tianjing Basin had the courage to fight against him? First, they made themselves smelly, then waited for them to get used to it before exchanging blows with them, greatly reducing their combat power. You are as despicable as insects in trash. Do you think this can stop my army? Shiwanya said contemptuously. Even if you use such a despicable trick, my aboriginal army won't retreat. It will only make me look down on you. Shiwanya's voice resonated in the air. It stinks to death. The other 2 were still cursing. The people of Tianjing Basin were almost angered to death by the scolding in Shiwanya's words. All of them flew into a rage. It was obviously you bastards who did it. Qin Yuan and Hong Luan were left behind on Earth. After all, they might have to flee for their lives the next time they came back. One less of these burdens was one less. Renbaqian stepped on the hard ground, and the scenery in front of him changed. He realized that he was back in Tianjing Basin. There were about a dozen people in the forest in the distance. It was a lot smaller than the hundreds of people who had left. There are still some left behind. I'll start with you. The Empress's voice came through the gas mask, and it sounded a little muffled. Her gaze was fixed on a dwarf who was standing on a rock in the distance. Before Renbaqian could finish his sentence, the Empress's silhouette appeared in the sky. Her fist smashed down with the sound of breaking through the air. Unexpectedly, in a flash, the figure appeared in the distance and had no intention of fighting with the Empress. Cowardly as a mouse, the Empress said coldly. The dwarf wasn't angry. He grinned at the Empress, looked deeply at Renbaqian, and said, I will peel off your skin and soak it in the toilet. Come on up. Renbaqian provoked with a smoke grenade in his hand. His posture was no different from holding a grenade bag and looking at death calmly. At most, they would perish together. Lin Chaola looked at Renbaqian with tears streaming down her face. Originally, she felt a little better. After all, she had been on Earth for 5 days, and the stench had lessened a lot. However, as soon as she returned, the strong stench made her feel unwell again. The dwarf had a toothache. That thing couldn't hurt anyone, but it was really too disgusting. The Empress didn't say a word. In a few flashes, she appeared in front of the dwarf and brazenly attacked. The dwarf didn't receive her attack at all and just kept running away. In a few moments, he had escaped into the forest, and there was a sudden rumbling sound in the forest. Large tracts of trees came crashing down with a loud creaking sound. A few unlucky earth will experts were also caught in the crossfire. With a punch from the Empress, all the bones in their bodies were shattered, and they fell to the ground dead. In a short period of time, the Empress had destroyed a small part of the forest, but she still couldn't catch up with the dwarf. After all, her strength had greatly decreased, and the dwarf was good at speed. Even though she was originally much stronger than the dwarf, she was helpless now. Seeing that she couldn't do anything to the dwarf, the Empress returned to Renbochen's side and asked, "Where should we go? No one is here." "I don't know if it's because Protector General Shi is here," Renbochen said. He had told the Empress about delivering a letter to Shiwanya on Earth. "Why don't we go up and take a look?" Renbochen said. This position was halfway up the mountain, and the large forest below blocked the way to the foot of the mountain and Wu City. After Renbochen finished speaking, he felt his collar being lifted by someone. Then, a gust of wind blew against his face, causing him to be unable to open his eyes. When he regained his balance, he found himself on a huge rock that was almost at the peak of the mountain. The mountain wind messed up the Empress's hair and hit Renbochen's face, bringing with it a faint stench. This was really a sad story. Renbochen felt that this was definitely a dark history. If anyone dared to write it down in the history books, one day, the Empress and the King stood at the peak of Wu Mountain and observed the world as if they were looking at palm lines. The stench emitted from their bodies and dispersed with the wind, causing people to cover their noses. He reckoned that even the resurrection of the former Empress wouldn't be able to save him. The Empress would suppress him in the toilet for 10,000 years. It was said that the Empress, especially someone like the Empress, was always emitting a unique fragrance that made people feel relaxed and happy like a spring breeze. Speaking of which, the Empress was usually quite fragrant, and the faint fragrance on her body was very pleasant. It was a pity that she perished together with the enemy. Looking into the distance from a high place, the air in this world wasn't polluted. The visibility was extremely high, and everything in the distance could be seen at a glance. Renbochen almost immediately saw a black dot outside of Wu City. It was just a black dot here, but it should be a very large group of people nearby. "It should be Protector General Shi who is attacking Wu City," Renbochen said after pondering for a while. It was a good thing that Shiwanya had arrived earlier than he had expected. It must have been tough for them to arrive here so quickly. Upon hearing that Shiwanya was here, the Empress nodded slightly. At the very least, Renbochen didn't need to use that kind of thing anymore. At the thought of this, the Empress heaved a sigh of relief from the bottom of her heart. It would be fine if it was the enemy, but it was her own army and her own generals. To the Empress, there was probably nothing worse than that smell. Even if it meant death. "Your Majesty, let's rendezvous with Protector General Shi. Tianjing Basin will be stable after we get rid of all the experts here in one fell swoop," Renbochen said. After he finished speaking, a small bottle appeared in his hand. "Your Majesty, this is perfume. It wouldn't be of much use if it was used in the past. However, it has been 5 days now, and the smell on my body has lessened a lot. Using this can at least cover up the smell on my body. Furthermore, I spent a lot of money to find someone to mix it. When combined with the previous stench, it will become another kind of floral fragrance." After this experience, Renbochen realized that the human sense of smell was very interesting. Fragrance and stench weren't absolute. For example, the smell of sh*T, after being diluted, was actually the fragrance of jasmine. This bottle of perfume was blended on this basis. The fainter stench on the body and the fragrance of the perfume blended together to form a kind of floral fragrance. Of course, Renbochen had to pay a hefty price to obtain such a thing in a short period of time. He spent 8 million yuan and had several top-notch perfumers working day and night to finally mix it after countless attempts. When the Empress heard this, she was immediately elated. Previously, she was still a little hesitant. It would be really embarrassing to meet her generals and troops with this damned stench on her body. Renbochen was indeed considerate. Chapter 468. The Empress happily sprayed perfume all over her body, took off her gas mask, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She looked at Rinpoche with an unfriendly gaze and asked, "Why do I smell like braised pork?" Rinpoche was dumbfounded. Sniff. It's obviously night glory, it's the smell of braised pork. I've eaten it before. The Empress's face darkened as if she was being bullied by his ignorance. But I smell a strong fragrance. Rinpoche felt that he had been wronged. Besides, the person who delivered the perfume had clearly said that it was the smell of night glory. Oh. It smells even worse. Lin Chaola couldn't stop crying. Perhaps Your Majesty's sense of smell is more sensitive than mine. After all, those perfumers are just ordinary people, and their sense of smell is definitely not as good as yours. Rinpoche applied what he had learned on the spot. If it was a single smell, then everyone could smell it very similar. However, it was entirely possible for two different smells to be mixed according to one's sense of smell. However, there was a huge difference between braised pork and night glory. The Empress's face darkened again and again, and she heaved a sigh of relief after a long time. In any case, braised pork smelled better than before, but she was a little hungry. Clang. Shi Wanya's saber struck like a gale, and his opponent's weapon almost flew out of his hand, leaving his chest wide open. Shi Wanya's body spun and struck 3 times. With the help of his body's twisting force, each strike was faster and stronger than the previous one. The third strike was half as fast as the first, and the force was almost twice as strong. The spirit will experts on the other side were directly struck into the city. Qing Yun's sword was just about to rescue them when he suddenly felt an imposing aura soaring into the sky from afar and frowned. It was the aura of Qi Zixiao. She knew that Shi Wanya was here. Shi Wanya put his saber behind his back and looked into the distance. He then said coldly, "Let's call it a day. Wait for me tomorrow after you've washed up, lest you dirty my saber." Trying to leave. No way. Qing Yun's sword roared. His face turned red, and his body grew bigger. The sword in the air suddenly turned into thousands of swords that rained down from the sky and covered the entire city. The power of each flowing light sword was equivalent to the power of a casual blow from him. The Empress wasn't dead. If they allowed her to meet up with Shi Wanya, they wouldn't stand a chance. As soon as he used this sword, he immediately became like a deflated balloon. His entire body emitted the smell of defeat, and the wrinkles on his face increased. It was as if he had aged 20 years, and his body was on the verge of collapse. This is interesting. Shi Wanya laughed out loud and dragged his long saber diagonally to the side of his body. The aura on his body surged as he violently waved his saber toward the sky. A huge snow-white saber light suddenly lit up the entire sky. This saber light seemed to split the sky in half. The people near the city walls could even hear the sound of cloth tearing. That was the sound of the saber tearing through the air. The sword rain in the sky collided with the huge saber light. The sword light shattered one after another, and the saber light seemed to have encountered some kind of obstruction. A strong wind swept out in all directions, and some people couldn't stand still and retreated. However, when the hundreds of sword lights shattered, the saber lights became dimmer and dimmer. Finally, they suddenly cracked open like glass. The remaining hundreds of sword lights swarmed down and headed straight for Shi Wanya. Subsequently, the saber lights clashed with the sword lights in the sky. After a loud bang, the entire city wall was forcefully smashed down by a 5-meter-wide section. When the dust settled, Shi Wanya was seen standing there with traces of blood seeping out of his body. Not bad. Shi Wanya looked in the direction of Qing Yun's sword with a look of admiration. This was the greatest reward he could give to his enemy. However, when Qing Yun's sword saw this scene, he spat out another mouthful of blood and looked even more defeated. Even this sword couldn't do anything to the other party. Qi Zixiao was so powerful, and so was Shi Wanya. The talents of the aboriginals were really enviable, to the point of despair. Retreat and follow me to welcome Her Majesty into the camp, Shiwanya said in a clear voice. At this moment, he felt a trace of warning in his heart. He turned his head and saw an old man holding a paper umbrella standing there and looking at him. The old man's aura was faintly discernible, but that paper umbrella made him feel a little frightened. Chang Tian looked at Shiwanya and smiled. It seems like I have learned a lot in this lifetime, but I have actually only learned one move. Come and take a look. All right. Shiwanya nodded. The long saber in his hand was no longer dragged by his side, but slanted in front of his chest. He also had a solemn look on his face. I'm afraid I can't fulfill my promise to you, Chang Tian said as he turned his head and looked at an old woman in the distance. I remember that you like beautiful flowers. They are yellow and have a very pleasant smell. Chang Tian thought to himself but didn't say it out loud. Chang Tian. The old woman's expression changed. Chang Tian smiled at her and turned his head to look at Shiwanya. His expression became solemn as he stared at the paper umbrella erected between his eyebrows. His heart was calm and devout, as if he was doing the most solemn thing to the gods. He poured all his attention into the umbrella, and then his whole body flashed and leaped hundreds of meters. He was still holding a paper umbrella in his hand, but in everyone's eyes, it was a long spear. Everyone could only see this spear, as if there was nothing else in the world except for this spear. It was as if this spear had existed since the beginning of the world and was only seen now. This was a spear that could pierce through the world. As fast as a meteor. Even faster than a meteor. It was so fast that Shiwanya only saw a figure flash before the tip of the spear appeared in front of him. The tip of the spear occupied his entire vision. His heart was beating wildly. This was an extreme crisis. All Shiwanya could do was block this spear with his saber and block this sure-kill spear. Ding! When the spear and the saber collided, there was only a soft sound, as if a nail had fallen to the ground. Pfft! Shiwanya looked down and saw that a paper umbrella had pierced through the saber and his body. Fresh blood dyed the white surface of the umbrella red, just like a painting of a red plum blossom in the snow that he had once seen. Protector General, the crowd in the distance shouted. The other two spirit wool experts rushed over but were entangled by others. Not bad. It's a pity that it's still a little short. Shiwanya raised his head and grinned at Chang Tian. His smile was full of the smell of blood. What a pity. Chang Tian was slightly regretful and disappointed. Just now, when Shiwanya's saber came into contact with the spear, he lifted it slightly to the side, which caused Chang Tian's spear to miss. It was precisely this slight deviation that allowed Shiwanya to avoid a vital point. What's your name? Shiwanya asked seriously. This spear strike was worth remembering. Chang Tian, which means everything is impermanent, and Tian, which means lawless, Chang Tian replied softly. I remember. Shiwanya nodded and asked, does this spear strike have a name? Nameless, this spear strike shall be named Nameless. Chang Tian and John Doe. Shiwanya laughed as he spat out blood from his mouth and retreated. When he pulled the umbrella out of his body, blood spurted out from the wound on his back. Retreat! Shiwanya shouted. The aboriginal army left behind some corpses and dispersed like the tide. Chang Tian. The old woman in the distance rushed to Chang Tian's side. He maintained his previous posture with a smile on his face and his eyes looking into the distance as if he was looking at the world that he was born and raised in. Chapter 469. The sound of iron hooves could be heard as a group of cavalrymen approached like a black dragon crouching on the ground. They stopped not far from the Empress. Your Majesty, please forgive us for being late. Shiwanya jumped down from the saber-toothed tiger and bowed. Just as he spoke, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The injuries on his body had been treated on the way here. Although he had just avoided a fatal shot, his internal organs were also severely injured. It was already amazing that he could come to see the Empress. "Greetings, Your Majesty." More than 2,000 cavalrymen got down from their mounts and bowed in unison. "Why are you so miserable?" The Empress frowned when she saw Shiwanya's miserable appearance. "I witnessed a spear technique, but I'm afraid I won't be able to see it in the future," Shiwanya said as he spat out blood. That person had used all his energy to unleash this fatal shot. No matter what, he would definitely die after this shot. This shot had become the final shot. There's such a person. The Empress was a little surprised. She wanted to see an expert who could injure Shiwanya so badly. Renbochin found a few familiar figures behind the cavalrymen. These people were dressed in ordinary clothes and were very different from the soldiers. It was hard to spot them in the crowd, but they kept jumping around as if they were afraid that he wouldn't see them. The Great Elder's youngest son, Shurgon, Dulaolu, Supeng, the gluttonous student who used the Katsura fruits to exchange for sweets, and a few others. Renbochin waved his hand. "Yague. I told you that you could see us." Dulaolu acted as if he had won a prize. Renbochin squinted his eyes and looked over. These children had too little homework. "Teacher." Shurgon hurriedly said. "Why are you in the group? Have you seen Tong Lan and the rest?" It was a coincidence that Shurgon's group met Shiwanya. After all, when they saw a large group of cavalrymen in Tianjing Basin, they immediately knew that something had happened and hurriedly joined the cavalry. Shiwanya also felt that it wasn't safe to let them wander around in the current situation, so he let them follow behind. "How's the homework going?" Renbochin asked. "I have some ideas," Shurgon replied. Renbochin nodded. Perhaps it was because of his upbringing, Shurgon was very thoughtful even though he was young. Compared to those careless aboriginal children, Renbochin had higher expectations for Shurgon. Very quickly, someone brought over an empty mount for them to sit on. Even though Shiwanya wanted to give his saber-toothed tiger to the Empress, this mount was extremely picky, so he gave up after thinking about it. "What are the casualties?" the Empress asked as she sat on her mount. 873. Shiwanya didn't need to ask the others. He knew clearly how many people had died in every battle along the way. Nearly 400 of them died on top of Wu City's walls. "Send them back to the mountains," the Empress said. "Yes. Is Protector General Shi alright?" Renbochin couldn't help but ask when he saw him spitting out mouthfuls of blood. "It's just a minor injury. I'm fine." Shiwanya grinned as blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth. "There's something in the blood you vomited," Renbochin reminded him. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed like he had vomited out his lungs. "I will be fine after a few months of recuperation," Shiwanya said casually. Renbochin gave him a thumbs up. "Your Majesty, why didn't you inform us before coming out?" Shiwanya couldn't help but ask along the way. "I was bored staying here. Now that you are here, there's no need to say any more." The Empress's words made Shiwanya swallow the rest of his words. As for the rich aroma of food coming from the Empress's body, he didn't even mention it. "Protector General Shi, is it just you guys?" Renbochin glanced at the advancing troops, roughly estimated the number of people, and asked. "It's enough to have us," Shiwanya said resolutely. Renbochin stroked his chin. If talking was useful, he could make all the experts in Tianjing Basin doubt their lives. Not to mention the high-end forces, the Empress only had 1/3 of her strength left, and Shiwanya had become like this. Just the 2,000 man-will cavalrymen facing 500 to 600 earth-will experts, more than 1,000 man-will experts, and a city full of guards, no matter how he looked at it, they had no chance of winning. In the past, the high-end forces of the Aboriginals had crushed the enemy, but now, they were being crushed. Originally, they didn't have the upper hand in terms of numbers and experts. Furthermore, they were besieging a city. Renbochin didn't have much hope that they would be able to take down Wu City. Unless, he still had dozens of smoke grenades, and he didn't know what would happen if he threw them into the city. Would they come out to fight or flee upon hearing the news? That night, everyone stayed at the foot of Mount Wu. Many of the soldiers who went to look for prey inadvertently entered the location where the battle took place that day and immediately returned with a body full of stench. The main reason was that there was a substance in skunk musk that had an extremely strong adhesion. Furthermore, this substance would release mercaptan when it came into contact with water molecules. Even if the smell on the body was reduced, as long as this substance was still present, it would release mercaptan when the air was humid, which was also that stench. Coincidentally, Tianjin Basin had a humid climate, especially at night. "How have you been here these few days?" During dinner, the Empress, who had gotten rid of the stench on her body, felt at ease and was finally concerned about other things. Renbochin understood that the Empress was referring to the people in Tianjin Basin. There's nothing for ordinary people to pay attention to. They can't see too far ahead and can't care that much. Furthermore, their current living conditions aren't considered good. As long as public opinion is well controlled, I believe that they will be able to stabilize and be of use to you. These sects and forces are the source of trouble. As long as we clean them up, use public opinion to stabilize the people, use a strong military force to deter them, and use kindness and might to stabilize Tianjin Basin. The Empress nodded and said, "I'll leave this matter to you when we return to Goose City. I'll give you 3 to 6 months. If they have any intention of rebelling again, don't blame me." Initially, she only wanted to give them 3 months because she didn't want to wait too long. However, after thinking about it, 3 months was indeed rather difficult for such a large area, so she relaxed to half a year. Renbochin nodded. The lives of more than 10 million people were on his shoulders, and this wasn't a light burden. The system in Tianjin Basin had to be changed. He didn't know how far he could go in half a year at most. Since he was just starting, he had to find someone who could take over and carry out his ideas. Shiwanya was good at killing people, but he couldn't be relied on in this matter. However, it would be much easier if he could subdue some of the experts in the city. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid that the Qin nation has sent troops." Renbochin recalled the news he heard from Su Qing. "Oh." The Empress responded faintly as if she didn't care. In fact, there wasn't much they could do here without a radio station. Moreover, the Protector General of the Southeast had always concealed his strength, and the Empress had confidence in him. "Your Majesty, have you heard of a saying?" "What?" "There are as many stars as there are people in the world. Every time a person dies, a star will fall. The more famous and powerful a person is, the brighter the star that belongs to him. I think that the star that belongs to your Majesty must be the brightest star in the sky." Renbochin placed his hands behind his back, leaned back, and looked up at the galaxy in the sky. The Empress looked up at the starry sky and suddenly said, "I want to see a meteor shower." Renbochin was speechless. This was a little difficult. Not far away, Shiwanya's ears twitched as he said resolutely, "Tomorrow, I will slaughter everyone in Wu City and let your Majesty see a meteor shower." Renbochin glanced at him and thought, "Why are you everywhere? Don't you have any sense of right and wrong? You even talk about your lungs." Chapter 470. The next morning, everyone set off after breakfast and stopped a few kilometers away from the north gate of Wu City. There were already many people watching from the top of the city wall. "Your Majesty, please give the order. I will break into Wu City and take down these rebels." Shiwanya asked for permission to fight in front of the Empress. Renbochin glanced at him and then at the top of the city wall. No matter how he looked at it, his side was at a disadvantage. After the battle with the Empress, there were only 11 people left. Qingyun's sword, who was the strongest among them, had lost a lot of energy after yesterday's battle. Chang Tian had poured all his energy into his spear and died after using it. Now, there were only 9.5 people who could fight. Lin Chaola and the other 2 spirit will experts could each hold off 3 people, so it wasn't a big problem. If the Empress were to personally fight, even if she only had 30% of her strength left, she could still suppress the other party in terms of high-level combat power. However, even if more than 2,000 soldiers were at the advanced man-will level, the other party had more than 500 earth-will experts, which meant that they could fight against 5 of them. Not to mention the others. "I will watch you seize the city from here," the Empress said faintly. Seeing that the 2 had decided to attack the city, Renbochin didn't say anything else and observed carefully. Following Shiwanya's order, more than 2,000 soldiers got off their mounts and rushed toward Wu City. When they arrived at the bottom of Wu City, the people at the front stopped about 3 meters below the wall, turned around, and used their hands to build a ladder above their heads. The people at the back soared into the air, stepped on their palms, and leaped 7 or 8 meters high. They either directly climbed over the wall or stepped on the wall for support. They climbed over the 8-meter-tall wall. After all, Wu City wasn't a big city, and the wall was only about 8 meters high. It was enough to stop ordinary people, but to stop man-will experts, it was useless. The Aboriginals didn't need any equipment to attack a city, and they could easily climb over a wall that was 8 meters high. If the wall was too high, they could rely on the experts to break the gate with brute force. In the past, when they attacked the wall, there would be a massacre. However, at this time, there was a group of earth-will experts on the wall. When the first batch of people climbed over the wall, more than half of them were chopped down and fell from the top of the wall. Following closely behind the first batch of soldiers, the second batch of soldiers jumped onto the city wall like a group of grasshoppers. Relying on their vigor and bravery, they forcefully occupied a small portion of the city wall despite being surrounded by many earth-will experts. As groups of soldiers jumped onto the wall, roars and shouts of killing rang out from the top of the wall, and blood spilled down from the top of the wall. Renbochin carefully observed the situation on the city wall and found that it was slightly better than what he had expected. Although these Aboriginal warriors were 4-way heaven experts and were equivalent to man-will experts, they were much stronger than man-will experts. In addition, the walls were narrow, and the teleportation range wasn't large. In this aspect, the Aboriginals had an advantage when using military combat techniques. Many of the earth-will experts on the city wall were at the initial stage of the earth-will level. Some of them weren't good at strength but were good at speed. In such a small area, they were at a disadvantage when facing 4 to 5 elite soldiers who had good teamwork. In particular, many of the Aboriginal warriors were slashing at each other. They didn't dodge and would retaliate with a slash of their own, trading injury for injury and life for life. This kind of bravery was something that those earth-will experts who lived like princes didn't possess. This kind of desperation was something that they couldn't accept. If they were asked to fight with the Empress, they naturally wouldn't cherish their lives. However, if they were asked to exchange their lives with these ordinary soldiers, everyone would hesitate. In this bloody battlefield, both sides were entangled with each other and were fighting for their lives at this moment. Of course, this was only part of the situation on the battlefield. In many places, 4 to 5 elite soldiers who had good teamwork could only barely resist an earth-will expert. From time to time, someone would be knocked down from the city wall. No matter how brave they were and how good their teamwork was, they were only at the man-will level. The disparity in strength between them and an earth-will expert was too great, and they were completely relying on fighting with their lives. The Aboriginals occupied about a quarter of the lower part of the city wall. In this part of the city wall, they repeatedly fought with their opponents and actually managed to gain a firm foothold for a while. At the bottom of the city wall, the Aboriginals were divided into 3 groups. Lin Chowla and 2 other spirit wool experts were fighting 1 against 3, which was the opposite of the situation on the city wall. Only Shiwanya stood upright in the distance and watched the killing on the city wall without saying a word. Your Majesty, what do you think? After watching for a long time, Rinpoche turned his head to look at the Empress, only to see her frown slightly and remain silent. Both sides fought for a while and only withdrew in the evening. Only half of the soldiers retreated. A full 1,000 people had spilled their blood on the small city wall. The Aboriginals suffered a lot as well. More than half of the 1,000 disciples from various sects were injured or killed, and nearly half of the earth wool experts were injured or killed. However, most of the casualties were from the weaker earth wool experts. On the contrary, the strong earth wool experts were mostly unharmed. It could be said that both sides had suffered heavy losses. Everyone retreated to the foot of Mount Wu. Rinpoche said to the Empress, Your Majesty, although the Aboriginals are good at fighting one-on-one, the Aboriginals are practitioners who are better at fighting one-on-one. Even though we can restrict their movements on the city wall, we are restricting both sides to a certain range and fighting them head-on. This is very disadvantageous for us. Do you have a good idea? The Empress looked up at him and hoped that he would say, Yes, I have a plan. Your Majesty, I have an idea, Rinpoche said. Speak. The Empress was in a much better mood after hearing what he said. Throw a few hundred smoke bombs into the city to force them to come out. If we use military formations to confront them, I think they are no match for us, Rinpoche said. Dozens of smoke bombs were still too few for a city like Wu City. However, if he could get a few hundred of them, it would be enough to spread the fragrance for 5 kilometers around Wu City. It would be refreshing, enjoyable, and memorable. The Empress clenched her fists and felt a little itchy. Even though this was a plan, she really didn't want to use it. The smell really made her feel guilty. If a few hundred smoke bombs were thrown into Wu City, it would be very cruel. Not to mention that they couldn't stay in Wu City, they couldn't stay outside the city either. At that time, a group of experts with a suffocating stench would charge over. That scene would be too beautiful. The smell could be directly emitted from the scene, and she didn't dare to think about it. The Empress called Shiwanya over and asked, Is it possible to attack this city? Shiwanya nodded and replied, I will definitely attack this city and present the heads of these rebels to your Majesty. Rinpoche looked at Shiwanya. From today's situation, Shiwanya could at most perish together with the other party. In fact, the remaining forces of the other party would become stronger as time passed. Where did he get the confidence to attack the city? Your Majesty, the winged cavalry is rushing toward Tianjing Basin after resting, Shiwanya said without Rinpoche asking. Rinpoche then remembered that the winged cavalry had already returned to Dayo before he set off for Tianjing Basin. The winged cavalry were the Empress's personal guards, and they would be wherever the Empress was. Now that the Empress was in the south, the winged cavalry would naturally follow. How long will it take? The Empress didn't say anything else after hearing that the most elite winged cavalry was rushing over. When I set off, the winged cavalry left Goose City 6 days ago. I estimate that they will definitely arrive in 3 days at most, Shiwanya said. Chapter 471. Although they were going to wait 3 days before attacking, they didn't do nothing. From the next day onwards, the army would march around Wu City in formation every day. Although there were only slightly more than 1,000 of them, no one dared to underestimate them. Your Majesty, please take a seat. Rinpoche brought over a wooden chair that still had the aroma of wood. It was made by a few soldiers that he had just found. Although there weren't any nails, mortise and tenon would do. After the Empress sat down, Rinpoche found a man with a loud voice to stand beside him and shouted whatever she said. Then, he sat on the ground and began to recall the words that he had said to persuade them to surrender. People in the city, listen up. You have been surrounded. The sea of bitterness has no bounds. Repent and you will be saved. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. Those who confess will be given leniency in prison. Those who resist will be sent home for the new year. If you surrender, you will still have a way out. On account of the goodness of the heavens, Her Majesty has decided to give you a chance and temporarily refrain from using weapons of mass destruction. I hope that you will soon realize that doing so will only lead to death. Only by surrendering can you exchange for a bright future. Everyone in Wu City was speechless. Did this guy want them to surrender or not? There are still mothers and children waiting for you at home. Don't let your loved ones cry because of a moment of happiness. Rebellion may feel good for a moment, but your whole family will be cremated. If you die, someone else will live in your house, spend your money, sleep with your wives, and beat your children. What a tragic story. Within a few minutes, these words were transmitted to the top of the city wall, giving everyone a headache. Let me go and kill him. Someone on the top of the city wall said angrily with a saber hilt in his hand. In a battle between two sides, any means could be used. However, the other party's words were really annoying. In addition, the smell on everyone's body hadn't disappeared, constantly reminding everyone that the guy outside was the culprit. Don't be provoked by him. He is waiting for someone to go out. Someone immediately stopped him. Humph. The person who was stopped was furious. He knew that if he went out, he would die, but he couldn't bear it. That fellow's words were really too despicable. Listening to it was really annoying. It was like a little bug buzzing in one's ear, making one want to slap it to death. It's useless. Just kill them all, Shiwanya said to Rinpochen after a whole morning. He scoffed at Rinpochen's idea of persuading him to surrender. It might be useful. Rinpochen didn't argue with him. He just smiled, got up, and eagerly went to look for the Empress for a meal. Persuading them to surrender was naturally useless now. The Aboriginals had always been using violence to curb violence and killing to stop the war. They had never talked about persuading the other party to surrender. Naturally, the other party wouldn't surrender either. They were hot-blooded and would fight to the death. However, if he revealed his intention to ask them to surrender, perhaps some people would remember it. Of course, it was useless now. After all, Wu City had not been breached. Even if there were people who had such thoughts, they would not show it. However, after the winged cavalry arrived and conquered Wu City, there might really be people who surrendered. After all, there were so many of them. They couldn't all be the kind of tough guys who would raise their heads and say, "I'll be a hero again after 18 years, right?" As long as a small number of people surrendered, it would be very useful in stabilizing Tianjin Basin in the future. In particular, the Earthwill experts from the various sects and powers were all well-known figures in Tianjin Basin. Their prestige in the sects and powers they belonged to wasn't low. With their presence, many things would be much easier to handle. In the afternoon, Rinpochen got someone to repeat what he had said in the morning. However, there weren't many people on the city wall this time. They seemed to have noticed that the Aboriginals didn't intend to attack today. There were only 2 or 3 experts on the city wall overlooking this place, followed by a few accompanying disciples. If we attack now, we will definitely be able to take down the top of the city wall in one fell swoop, Shiwanya said as he looked at the top of the city wall. They think so too. Rinpochen poured a bucket of cold water on him. On the surface, those experts didn't seem to be on the top of the city wall. However, their movements were extremely fast. Even if they were resting in the city, they would be able to rush to the top of the city wall in a short period of time if a battle broke out. Furthermore, they might be conserving their energy and waiting to attack. In the evening, when the aboriginals retreated to the foot of Mount Wu, Qing Yun's sword looked at the information that had just been transmitted to him in silence. Dozens of people looked at him from below and waited for him to speak. Many of them still had bloodstains on their bodies. A few days ago, there were still many experts here. All the experts in Tianjing Basin had gathered and were full of lofty aspirations to surround and kill Qi Zixiao before leading the people of Tianjing Basin out of this cage. However, after a few battles, they had lost more than half of their forces, which made everyone feel somewhat sorrowful. "We have lost," Qing Yun's sword said miserably after remaining silent for the time it took for an incense stick to burn. His originally ashen face became even more ashen. "The outcome isn't decided yet." Qing Yun's sword, as the person in charge this time, "How can you say such demoralizing words?" Someone immediately reprimanded him. The person who retorted was an elder from a major sect. Their supreme elder had died in the battle with the Empress, and most of the experts in the sect had died in the battle yesterday. At this moment, he was filled with blood because he wanted revenge. How could he listen to such words? Elder Su is right. The outcome isn't decided yet. The other party only has about 1,000 people, and we have so many experts. Why should we be afraid of them? Someone immediately echoed. If we admit defeat like this, how can we face those who died in the battle? After these two bloody battles, which sect or power didn't have people who died in the battle? Their close friends had died in the battle, and they had the ambition to break out of this cage for decades. How could they admit defeat so easily? Qing Yun's sword closed his eyes in silence and placed the slip of paper on the table beside him. Immediately, someone went forward to pick it up. After taking a look, his face immediately changed, and he passed it to the next person. "The winged cavalry are here." A voice full of despair immediately silenced the whole. There were two kinds of armies in the world, the aboriginals and the other armies. The aboriginals had two kinds of armies, the winged cavalry and the other armies. One was made up of cavalry that had reached the Kismet heaven level, and the other was made up of earth will experts. An army of more than 1,000 soldiers was equivalent to an entire protectorate. "Aren't they in great Xia?" someone said hoarsely. "They are already here. They are 100 kilometers away." "Why did you only get the news now?" someone asked in a hoarse voice. "The entire residence of the warlord of Longzhou City is dead, and the entire city is under the control of the Protectorate of the South. The news came from Pingling City. They should be 150 kilometers away now and will arrive tomorrow," Qing Yun's sword said with his eyes closed. "Withdraw from Wu City and return to your sections. The Northern Alliance, Southern Metropolis, and Green Bellflower will immediately mobilize their troops. All the sects will bring their disciples to join the army," someone immediately said. Previously, their objective was to surround and kill Qi Zixiao. After her death, Dayo was without a leader, and there were strong enemies outside. Although Tianjing Basin would receive revenge, it was just the Protectorate of the South. Even if Dayo wanted to mobilize more troops, they were powerless. In fact, if a war broke out between multiple parties, Dayo would collapse in one fell swoop. At this point, it was obvious that they had already failed. In that case, they could only mobilize their troops immediately and fight the aboriginals. As soon as he said this, everyone immediately responded, and the hall immediately became noisy. After all, the winged cavalry was about to arrive. If they continued to defend Wu City, they would be courting death. The final outcome would be to perish together with the city. If they mobilized their troops now, they still had a chance. "Let's do it this way," Qing Yun's sword said with his eyes closed. "Principal Ren, an old friend is here to see you. Please come out for a chat." A clear voice came from afar. Ren Baqian was being hung on a tree branch by the Empress. Just now, when the two of them played mahjong, The Empress, who had successfully crushed Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, was being plastered like a mummy by Renbaqian. Upon hearing this voice, Renbaqian immediately became spirited and said, "Quickly put me down. You have a lot of old friends." The Empress was under the tree with her face plastered with paper slips. As an Empress, she still had a basic moral outlook. Even though Renbaqian was hung on the tree, she didn't remove the paper slips. It's an envoy sent by Great Xia to contact everyone in Tianjin Basin to mobilize their troops. Oh. Behead him then. Someone come. Your Majesty, wait a moment. I made an agreement with him. He must have something important to do. Renbaqian quickly shouted. After a while, Renbaqian, who was followed by a spirit will expert, saw Su Qing standing on a rock. "Sir Ren, you deceived me so badly, I just saved your life." Chapter 472. Just as Su Qing had said, he didn't want to see Dao sink into the quagmire of Tianjin Basin. Under the pincer attack from all sides, Dao was likely to collapse. It would only benefit him if Great Xia suffered another crushing defeat. Therefore, after everyone left the city, he found an opportunity to see Renbaqian. Renbaqian gave him a thumbs up after hearing this. Even though he, the spy, had left, there was still a snitch. These people from Tianjin Basin didn't die unjustly. Su Qing smiled modestly at Renbaqian's gesture of praise. "I definitely won't forget about our agreement." Renbaqian cupped his hands and hurriedly went to look for the Empress. In just a few moments, the soldiers of the Protectorate of the South were ready to set off. Renbaqian muttered to himself for a while and said, "If you can capture them alive, bring them back alive. Of course, your own safety is the most important." Shi Huanya looked at the Empress, who nodded and said, "Do as he says." Understood. Shi Huanya cupped his fists at the Empress, led everyone on their mounts, and set off under the cover of night. The thunder's hoofbeats alarmed the birds and beasts in the distance, and for a moment, the roars of the beasts lingered in the air. There were winged cavalry warriors rushing over from the north of Wu City, and Mount Wu was in the west. Most people dispersed towards the south and east before returning to their sects via other routes. Shi Huanya's 1,000 cavalrymen headed straight for the south. As for how many people he could catch, that would depend on his luck. After all, those Earth will experts weren't weaklings. They could hear the hoofbeats of the cavalry from afar and find a place to hide. Therefore, Shi Huanya and his group headed straight to the south this time. When the sky started to brighten, they began to cast their nets to search for fish. After they left, the Empress asked Renbaqian, "Previously, you said that you had an agreement with him. What was it?" Renbaqian told him about the agreement he had with Su Qing. This was to ensure that the rebellion in the south had not been pacified and that it was dragged into a quagmire. Unless absolutely necessary, the armies of the Protectorate of the South could not be mobilized, and new armies would have to be mobilized to the south. After all, this wasn't a small matter. This method would cause Great Xia to become restless again. At that time, Dao would really have to face a pincer attack from 3 nations. Therefore, he wasn't confident that the Empress would agree. However, under the circumstances at that time, he couldn't care about anything else. Therefore, after he finished speaking, he began to think about how the Empress would view this matter. If Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation attack together, do you think Dao can win? The Empress asked. Would Her Majesty lose? Renbaqian asked. The Empress's cold eyes lit up and a smile appeared on her face. Of course, I won't lose. Then he said, but these are 2 different things. My army has to face the other 3 countries as enemies. The continuous war has put a lot of pressure on all aspects of the country. We will win. Of course we will. As long as Tianjing Basin was stabilized, there would be nothing to worry about. The Qin nation and the Yun nation wouldn't pose too much of a threat to them. They only had to be careful of Great Xia. However, we don't need to face the entire Great Xia, just one of their armies. As long as we accumulate our strength and wait for Great Xia to extend its claws again, we can quickly cut them off. At that time, Great Xia will be in chaos, Ren Baqin said. We have radio stations and walkie-talkies. We can contact various places on the battlefield at any time and keep abreast of the situation in various places. Whether it's the command and deployment of the nation's armies or the command of the generals and soldiers, we can command them with ease. We have binoculars and drones. Similarly, in terms of reconnaissance, we can figure out the other party's every move in advance. Coupled with the walkie-talkies, we can easily find and defeat the other party's weaknesses. Most importantly, we have brave soldiers who can fight 10 enemies at once. As long as the logistics can be guaranteed, there's no reason for us to lose, Ren Baqin said resolutely. You're right. The Empress nodded. If it was before, 100 million taels of silver would have been enough for me to make up my mind. However, I always feel that with you around, 100 million taels of silver isn't an unattainable figure. Am I right? The Empress smiled, which was rare for her. She smiled very happily. Your Majesty is right. Ren Baqin smiled as well. The Empress's trust in him made him feel very warm. Both of them looked at each other and smiled. Under this tranquil moonlight, both of them felt very relaxed. Nighttime allowed people to let go of a lot of things. Ren Baqin twisted his body and sat beside the Empress. Both of their shoulders gently leaned against each other. Ren Baqin took a whiff of the Empress's strong fragrance of tuberose and used his fingers to brush aside a strand of her hair. The Empress didn't mind such an intimate action anymore. Both of their hearts were very soft. It was as if they were the only two people in the world. The sounds of birds and beasts in the distance seemed to have disappeared. On the contrary, a few guards not far away looked at both of them from time to time before looking up at the sky. Today's moonlight was really beautiful. There's the smell of red braised meat on your body. I'm hungry. The Empress suddenly used her shoulder to nudge him and said, Ren Baqin, Your Majesty, do you know that you're spoiling the mood? Give me back that gentle and charming atmosphere just now. Ren Baqin looked at the Empress for a long time, but she didn't feel guilty at all. She looked at him confidently with a face that said, I'm hungry, go and cook. After looking at each other for a long time, Ren Baqin couldn't help but admit defeat. He sighed and asked the soldiers to clear away the unfinished meat for him to roast for the Empress. The Empress looked at his busy back and smiled again. Her smile was a little sweet. This was a smile that Ren Baqin had never seen before. Unfortunately, he didn't see it because his back was facing the Empress. I'm hungry too. Lin Chala squatted on a tree and said. The two of them were too smelly, but they didn't feel it. She couldn't bear it anymore and could only hide far away. After eating supper, the Empress rested on a wooden couch that emitted a fragrant smell of wood. Ren Baqin lay on the lawn not far away and looked at the night sky. Unknowingly, he had fallen into a deep sleep. He dreamed of his wedding with the Empress, dreamed of entering the bridal chamber. Ren Baqin was filled with excitement. The Empress blushed shyly and wanted to reject him. Half of her breasts were exposed. At this moment, he was awakened by the crisp chirping of a bird. Ren Baqin opened his eyes abruptly. The sky had already started to brighten. He wanted to close his eyes and continue dreaming, but he realized that he couldn't continue at all. Furthermore, the dream was getting more and more blurry. Damn it, just a little more. Ren Baqin's face turned black. Just a little more, just a little more, just a little more, just a little more. He inadvertently turned his head to look at the Empress and saw her leaning on the wooden couch, looking at him with clear eyes. He didn't know if she hadn't slept for the whole night or just woke up. "I feel that you are thinking of some disrespectful ideas," the Empress said. "Your Majesty, I'm more wrong than Do-yi," Renbochin said with an aggrieved look. He conveniently changed his posture and bent down to hide something. If the Empress knew about his dream, he would really be hung on the southeast branch. The Empress curled her lips and ignored him. "It's daybreak. Let's begin to reel in the net," Renbochin said. The harvest would depend on this net. The others were still fine, but it was better to capture the people from the southern metropolis and the green bellflower as soon as possible. Shiwanya sat on the saber-toothed tiger and ordered, "Send 40 teams with 20 people each. Spread out and search. If you discover any enemies, immediately shout and contact me." "Yes." Following the response, more than 1,000 people immediately spread out and began to search along the farmland on both sides of the dirt road. The rest of the people followed behind Shiwanya as they slowly made their way toward Wu City. Not long after, Renbochin looked into the distance with a bloody smile on his face and said, "There's prey." Chapter 473. Early in the morning, Renbochin sat in front of the bonfire and used the left and right interfighting technique to roast 2 jumping goats. These goats were very small in size, but their movements were very fast. Furthermore, their hooves could even break the skulls of ferocious beasts and were considered to be relatively rare prey. For the past 2 days, the ordinary soldiers had been eating baby asts. Baby asts could be seen everywhere in groups. They had the appearance of rabbits but the habits of wolves. They didn't taste good and their meat was a little astringent. In ancient times, there were some generals who loved their soldiers and would eat and live together with them. However, Renbochin wasn't a general and neither was the Empress. Naturally, he wouldn't let himself suffer. A thin and slightly hunchbacked old man in a green robe slowly walked over from afar. The old man's hair was completely white, and his body emitted a withering aura. His movements were not fast, as if he was walking on the verge of death. When the students and dozens of soldiers who were preparing breakfast noticed them, they immediately became vigilant. "They're enemies." The soldiers drew their weapons. "This old man is not here to fight." "I merely wish to chat a little," said the old man. "Shirgan." Renbochin gestured for Shirgan to come over and take the breakfast that was being roasted. He wiped the dust off his hands, nodded to the Empress, and walked over to the old man. Qingyun's sword. Renbochin didn't expect him to actually come over. Furthermore, he came alone and wanted to have a chat with him. However, he could guess what the other party wanted to ask. Renbochin stopped tens of meters away from Qingyun's sword and looked at him. His complexion was completely different from when they first met. Back then, although his hair was also white, and one could roughly tell his age, his complexion was extremely good. After all, even if a spirit wool expert was 100 years old, it wouldn't be a problem for him to live for another 30 to 50 years. Furthermore, he would only rapidly deteriorate 1 year before his death. But at this moment, his body was withered, and he seemed to have aged more than 20 years. "You didn't expect this, did you?" Qingyun's sword asked. Renbochin nodded honestly. He really didn't expect this. "I didn't expect that either," Qingyun's sword said bleakly. Indeed, he didn't expect Renbochin to be a spy. He also didn't expect the envoy from Great Xia to collude with Renbochin and report to him. When he heard the news, he was at a loss for a long time. He didn't know what was going on in this world. What support? What uprising? It all sounded like a joke. The things that happened between countries and in the imperial court were not something that people of the Jianghu like them could understand. They were just hot-blooded people, but they were like fools, doing things that many people thought were very stupid. Qin Yun's sword stood there for a long time, then spoke again. I want to ask you something. Tell me the truth. They all call me an honest and adorable husband. Renbochin replied sincerely. Qin Yun's sword looked at him deeply. Honest and adorable. Honest and adorable. He had been deceived by this person. If we lose, how will you treat the people here? Qin Yun's sword asked slowly. This was his goal for coming here. This matter was too big. They were trying to kill the Empress. If he succeeded, as long as he could fend off the vengeance of the Protectorate of the South, he would be able to counterattack. However, if they failed, then with the habits of the Aboriginals, the only thing they would do would be to roll their heads. The people of Tianjing Basin were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Therefore, he came here to try to persuade Renbochin to let those innocent people go. This was the only thing he could do after everything he had planned failed due to a blind impulse. Victory. He still had this idea before, but it was gone now. Even the emissary of Great Xiao and the Aboriginals were colluding. He didn't know if what he and his people were doing was a farce in the eyes of others. Su Qing's betrayal was a huge blow to him. As I said, you guys are too anxious. Renbochin said as he looked around, found a rock, and sat down. That's why I'm here. In fact, you guys and the Aboriginals aren't irreconcilable enemies. It's not that this world can't accommodate two races living together. Of course, the Aboriginals don't have enough brains, so there hasn't been a good arrangement for you guys all these years. Of course, you guys, those who survived 70 years ago, aren't at ease. Over the decades, the relationship between the two parties has worsened. In fact, it's precisely because the Aboriginals don't have enough brains that you guys can actually do a lot of things. Economy, culture, scientific research, and many other aspects, you guys can play a considerable role in many aspects. You guys complement each other. The Aboriginals have martial arts but no brains. You guys don't have martial arts or brains, but your brains are still a little better than the Aboriginals. In the distance, the Empress picked up a stone and flew toward them. Qin Yun's sword caught it, looked in the Empress's direction, and said to Renbochin, your position in the Aboriginals is higher than I thought. If it was someone else who directly criticized the Aboriginals' brains in front of Qi Zixiao, they would probably have been buried by now. However, Qi Zixiao couldn't bear to throw a stone at him. Instead, she threw a stone at herself as a warning. Although this action was a little girlish, it showed how important he was to Qi Zixiao. Go on, I'm all ears, Qin Yun's sword said. When he first met the Empress, Renbochin seemed to have said this, but no one could or was willing to listen. Even if he said it, they wouldn't believe him. Now that he knew the final outcome, he let go of everything and calmed down to listen. This in itself was a very sad thing. This time, I'm here to deal with this matter and let you guys go out. First, let a small group of people who are more stable go out to do business or do other things. Interact with the Aboriginals, let the ordinary Aboriginals understand you, and let you understand the ordinary Aboriginals. Both sides will understand each other through interaction and treat each other fairly instead of being full of prejudice. After the first step is achieved, the rest will be gradually released. Of course, this will take some time, but as time passes, you guys will live under the same sky as the Aboriginals. My goal will be achieved, and so will yours. Really? Qin Yun's sword's voice trembled slightly. How could the expectations of so many people for decades be achieved so easily? There's no need to lie to you. What you see is so small. It's like looking at the sky through the mouth of a well. And what I see is much more than what you guys see. There's also a lot more demand for all kinds of talents. In the future, Dayo will no longer be a country that is useless except for war. Instead, its economy, culture, and education will be far superior to this era. It will be the center of this world. I need talents, a lot of talents in education, economics, scientific research, planning, and manufacturing. Only a lot of talents can achieve the vision that Her Majesty and I have. Even in Tianjin Basin, I will make education universal so that every child can go to school and become the talents that I need. Then, they will enter various positions that require them to play a role. After 10, 20, or 30 years, there will even be officials from Tianjin Basin entering the imperial court. Qing Yun's sword didn't speak for a long time. He didn't quite believe it. If the aboriginals and the people of Tianjin Basin could live peacefully under the same sky, it might really be achieved in a few decades if it was really as Renbachin said. He found it hard to believe that the children of Tianjin Basin could go to school and learn knowledge. This was something that had never happened in previous dynasties. Even with the wealth of Great Xia, it was still impossible to achieve. As for the other things, he didn't understand at all. It sounded like the person in front of him and Qi Zixiao had a huge plan that included many aspects. However, he didn't know or imagine what this plan was. Make Dao the center of this world. These words seemed to be sleep-talking. However, looking at the other party's high-spirited appearance, it seemed that this was really his plan. The most important thing was that he was relieved. It seemed that the other party really didn't intend to kill them all. In that case, there was no need to say those words that he had previously thought of. Chapter 474. Renbachin still hoped that Qing Yun's sword would surrender. As the chief of the Hidden Village and the leader of the Hidden Alliance, it would be extremely helpful to pacify Tianjin Basin if he surrendered. Furthermore, he wasn't an ambitious person. His greatest wish was for the people of Tianjin Basin to be able to leave this place. Renbachin actually didn't want to exterminate all the sects and clans. Those who hadn't made up their minds were the people from the three major powers. This was because the others were people from the underworld, didn't control power, couldn't motivate people, and didn't aim for the imperial court. Even if they stayed, they wouldn't cause too much trouble. As for the people from the three major powers, they were completely different from them. They were the rulers of Tianjin Basin, which was equivalent to a country within a country. Their thoughts were more complicated and had more ideas. Therefore, Renbachin still had to consider whether these people could stay. Qing Yun's sword didn't give Renbachin an answer. After listening to Renbachin, he cupped his fists and turned to leave. Before coming here, he only wanted to hear the truth from Renbachin and then live and die together with Wu City. However, Renbachin's words made his heart waver. Surrender was easy to say. However, he had gathered so many people and lost so many people. Could he really surrender so easily? What face did he have to face the others? At this time, surrendering was a more difficult choice than death. It was easy to die. Once he died, he could leave a good reputation that would be spread among the people of Tianjin Basin and even be written down. However, if he surrendered, he would have to bear countless curses and his reputation would be ruined. He wouldn't have the face to meet others after death just to see the future that Renbachin spoke of. He couldn't decide between these two choices. Seeing that Qing Yun's sword had gone far away, Renbachin shook his head, turned around, and took the roasted jumping goat from Shirgan. After eating breakfast, Renbachin thought for a while and asked Shirgan and Lin Chaola to wait near Wu City to prevent the winged cavalry from arriving early and massacring the entire city. Shirgan was quite talented. At such a young age, he was already at the Kismet Heaven level, which was equivalent to an Earth Will expert. He was also quick-witted. If there were other Spirit Will experts in Wu City who could slap him to death, it would be too unjust. As for Lin Chaola, if she were to go alone, she would probably wake up to find that the rocket developed by Dao had already flown out of the planet. After sending the two of them out, Renbachin recalled his previous question. He turned around and asked the Empress, "Your Majesty, what is the name of our planet? The Empress looked at him in a daze. Look, our country and the world are all on a planet called Earth. What about here? The Empress pondered deeply and said, Deo Ball. Renbachian's face was filled with question marks. Your Majesty, can you please be more attentive? Why don't we call it 8,000 balls? After Renbachian finished speaking, he looked at the Empress's face and immediately changed his mind. 8 purple balls. Hey, Your Majesty, I suddenly thought of a suitable name. Let's call it Zixiao Star. The Empress's gloomy face immediately brightened up. This is it. It felt good to have a planet named after her. What if the planet is square? The Empress raised a very serious question. Renbachian pondered for a long time. Would Fang's planet appear? It wouldn't be a planet then, it would be Minecraft. This question was a little difficult for someone who used to be a bad student like him. Also, there's a star in the sky that belongs to me. Wouldn't that be the same name? The Empress still remembered that everyone corresponded to a star. Although this was just a beautiful story, she treated it as true. Zixiao Star and Zixiao Ball. Pow! Zixiao Heavenly Star and Zixiao Earth Star. Very much to my liking. The Empress's gloomy face brightened up again. Your Majesty, do you think there are other continents outside of this one? After we conquer the Yun nation, we will build a ship and send people out to see how big this world is. Renbachian said nonchalantly with his swollen hands. Okay. The two of them imagined the original appearance of this world for a while. In the afternoon, they heard the sound of hooves and stirring up dust in the distance. Nearly 1,000 riders rushed over from afar and stopped in unison. They got off their mounts, cupped their fists, and said, Greetings, Your Majesty. Although there were only 1,000 riders, their momentum was comparable to that of an army. Every rider exuded a valiant, powerful, and bloody aura from the soles of their feet to the top of their heads. The Empress stood up and looked at the warriors in front of her, whose leather armor was covered with various scars. It was these people who had gone deep into Great Xia when Renbachian went there. During the war with Great Xia, these people acted as the blade and entered Great Xia again after the war. After returning to Deo, they rushed here without stopping. Out of the 1,500 people, only about 900 were left. The Empress's gaze swept across everyone's faces before saying faintly, Take a rest first. Yes, Your Majesty. The Empress called for the captain of the winged cavalry to inquire about the situation in Great Xia. The captain of the winged cavalry was a burly man with a big beard. His name was Gongjing, and they were familiar with each other when they were in the north. Renbachian heard an interesting story. Li Qinqiu actually kidnapped a few so-called scholars in Deo and brought their families back under their bitter pleas. County Commandant Gong, where are those people? Renbachian was very interested in these scholars. He didn't have the prejudice that the Aboriginals had against people from other countries. After all, Earth was a global village, and he could see people everywhere. Principal Ren, I don't know about this. Oh. Renbachian nodded. It seemed like he had to go back and ask Li Qinqiu. Fortunately, he had sent Shurgan over in advance. Otherwise, Wu City would have been filled with people by now. It wasn't until late at night that Shi Wanyu returned with his army. Among them were dozens of half-dead captives who were covered in blood. These captives were thrown down from their mounts. When they realized that there was another army besides the Protectorate of the South, the winged cavalry, their faces were filled with despair. The winged cavalry had indeed arrived. Your Majesty, the other party has spirit wool experts, and we only managed to capture 23 people, Shi Wanyu reported as he strode to the Empress. It was slightly less than Renbachian had expected, but capturing one was still good. Carrying the torch, he went to the captives who were surrounded in the middle and sized them up. There were 2 ladies from the full-star pavilion, a few people from the green bellflower, and an old man whom he had met in the hidden village. There were also some people from other sects of various sizes. There were no people from the Golden Ring residence or the girl who had learned the arrow from him for half a month. Everyone was covered in blood and injuries. Some of them had twisted limbs, and some were even missing 1 or 2 limbs. It seemed like they had been captured after a bloody battle. When everyone saw Renbochin under the torch, they glared at him. Pfft! A woman from the Manxing pavilion spat a mouthful of blood right in front of Renbochin's shoes. Immediately, a soldier went over and kicked her blood-stained but still pretty face. She flew backward and spat out blood, as well as her teeth in midair. "I want them alive," Renbochin shouted. "Split up and watch them. If anyone tries to escape, break their legs and keep them alive," Renbochin instructed before turning around and leaving. Everyone looked at him with murderous eyes. If looks could kill, Renbochin would have been dead by now. The night passed. After breakfast the next day, Renbochin ordered his men to carry the captives to Wu City. He threw the captives on the ground in front of the city walls so that the people could see them clearly. Renbochin then ordered his men to shout, "People in the city, listen up. People in the city, listen up. You've been surrounded. Surrender is your only way out." Chapter 475. You have already won. "Let them go and exchange my life for theirs," Qingyun's sword said as he appeared at the top of the city wall. Village Chief. Senior. Regardless of whether it was above or below the city wall, everyone was sorrowful and moved. Qingyun's sword was a spirit will expert, yet he was willing to exchange his life for the lives of those earth wheel and man will experts. This almost made everyone cry. Renbochin pondered whether this old man couldn't bring himself to surrender and wanted Renbochin to give him a way out of this embarrassing situation. Of course, thinking this way might be a little narrow-minded. After all, these people came here with the intention to die. However, this old man's lifelong wish was for the people of Tianjing Basin to be able to leave this place. Since Renbochin had already told him all this, wouldn't he want to see if Renbochin could do what he said? After all, this was his lifelong wish, and it was so close at hand. If it were Renbochin, he would definitely want to see it happen. Besides, what was the use of letting these 20 people go? Wasn't he worried that Renbochin would massacre Wu City? Renbochin might not be able to do it, but Shiwanya definitely could. Just the fact that they besieged the Empress was enough to exterminate the entire city. Renbochin pondered for a while and decided to give him a way out of this embarrassing situation. He stepped forward and said, "Did you see that? There are 1,000 brothers behind me, and 1,000 super brothers are waiting for you in high spirits." The 2,000 burly men behind him bulged their muscles as if to annotate Renbochin's words. Of course, if they knew what brothers meant, they wouldn't have this expression. Surrender. Open the gates and surrender now, and there won't be a massacre. This is the only way for you to survive. Otherwise, these people and the people of Wu City will die, including you. Including you. You can only die if I want you to. I won't let you die, but if someone dies, what awaits you is a massacre. Oh, wrong. You can only die if Her Majesty wants you to die. Qingyun's sword stood on the city wall in silence for a long time before looking up at the sky and sighing. It was a heroic, stirring, and lonely scene. He acted as if it was real. The more Renbochin looked at him, the more he felt that he was acting. "Open the gates," Qingyun's sword said in a deep voice. Village Chief. "Open," Qingyun's sword shouted. A moment later, the city gates slowly opened. A group of people stood at the gate, their eyes filled with anger. Although they had already known that they had lost this battle 2 days ago, using a massacre to threaten them was truly despicable. Go, tie them up, Rinpoche said to the people beside him. You're going too far, someone shouted angrily. Let them tie him up. A loss was a loss. There's no need to implicate those innocent people. Qing Yun's sword said calmly. His voice was devoid of emotion. Only those who were familiar with him would be able to hear the sorrow in his voice. No matter what, he had surrendered. No matter how many excuses he had, he couldn't hide from the bottom of his heart that he had let down those who had died. Although everyone was furious, they knew that resistance was useless at this moment. The situation was already lost. Since the winged cavalry was already here, they would only die even if they resisted. They might even infuriate the other party and cause them to massacre the entire city. He steeled his heart and no longer resisted. The rope used to tie people up was made from vines soaked in animal oil. It was extremely tough, and the more one struggled, the tighter the rope became, to the point that it could even cut into the flesh. Even an earth will expert wouldn't be able to escape if he was tied up. However, this kind of rope wasn't enough to deal with a spirit will expert. This was because a spirit will expert could use their spirit and even condense heaven-grade weapons. There were many ways to break the rope. After waiting for everyone to be tied up, Rinpoche pinched his nose and walked to the front of everyone to look at their faces. There weren't many people left, only a dozen or so, and they were all from the hidden village. Qing Yun's sword was the only spirit will expert. What about the others? Rinpoche asked. Don't you already know? Qing Yun's sword was the only one who was not tied up. He looked at the captives they had captured last night and sighed. Don't play any more tricks, or else even the gods won't be able to save you, Rinpoche reminded. There's no need, Qing Yun's sword said faintly. He had 1,000 earth will experts and 4 spirit will experts. Qi Zixiao was also a top-notch expert. At this moment, even if all the experts in Tianjing Basin who were at their peak were gathered here, they still wouldn't be a match for him. Furthermore, more than half of the experts in Tianjing Basin had already died. Rinpoche returned to the Empress's seat and said, Your Majesty, please enter the city. Enter the city. The Empress waved her hand. Then, she lowered her voice and asked Rinpoche, Is the smell still there? Rinpoche felt a toothache. He had brought this upon himself. Your Majesty, please bear with it. In fact, the smell on these people is the main point, Rinpoche whispered. The Empress also felt a toothache when she heard this. Even so, they still had to enter the city. The winged cavalry was divided into 2 groups with the Empress in the middle. When passing by the city gate, the Empress didn't look at the people who were tied up. To her, these people were never her match and were just some restless rebels. Now that Rinpoche was handling them, she couldn't be bothered to look at them. This made the people who were tied up feel an indescribable feeling. The other party actually didn't even bother to look at them. The people from the Protectorate of the South followed behind. After entering the city, they immediately dispersed to look after the guards in the city, and a portion of them went to guard the city gate. The streets were very quiet. Occasionally, the sound of children crying could be heard from the houses on both sides of the street, but it was immediately covered up. The moment the winged cavalry entered the city, everyone ran back home and prayed for their own fate. They also peeked through the cracks of the windows to observe this world-famous army and the Empress of Dayo. After passing through half of the city, everyone arrived at the warlord's residence. Rinpoche went in first, walked around, and then came out while covering his nose. This place used to be the base camp of those people, and the smell was extremely strong. He got someone to find a big house nearby that didn't have any smell and chased the people out. This house would be the Empress's temporary residence. I'm going to take a bath. I'll leave the rest to you. Qing Yuan. The Empress entered the house and walked in while talking. Halfway through, she suddenly remembered that Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan were still on Earth. Bring the two of them back tonight. Your Majesty, there isn't anyone who can use this place now. Do you want me to boil some water for you to take a bath? Ren Baqian asked. Ouch! After Ren Baqian finished speaking, he felt the Empress stepping on his foot. He felt that his big toe was cracked. He gasped while holding his foot. Seeing that Gong Zhang and a few guards were looking at him, Ren Baqian glared back. Everyone immediately gave him a thumbs up. Find a room. I'm going to rest. I haven't slept well these past 2 days. Yes. I've already ordered people to clean up. Ren Baqian limped and gritted his teeth as he followed behind the Empress. Go and do your work. The Empress waved her hand when they arrived. Ren Baqian watched the Empress enter the room before turning to the hall and ordering people to bring in Qing Yun's sword and the others, as well as the captives from last night. He sat on a wooden chair in the hall. The back of the chair was curved, and there was a bit of an ergonomic feel to it. There was even a pillow behind the waist. It made him feel very comfortable when he sat on it. This made Ren Baqian think highly of these remnant citizens of Tianjing Basin. Go and ask the original owners of this place who made this chair and bring them here, Ren Baqian said to the guards beside him. It just so happened that he lacked a carpenter who could make sofas and chairs. Then, he looked pensive as if something was missing. After a long time, Qing Yun's sword and the others were brought into the hall. Looking at Ren Baqian's pensive expression, they began to guess how he was going to deal with them. Ren Baqian thought for a long time and suddenly realized why he felt that something was missing. It seemed like someone was missing. Where did that last Lin Chaola go? Did he call her when he left this morning? Lin Chaola squatted on a branch and looked at the messy ground with a dumbfounded look on her face. Chapter 476. In the future, you can go out and see if it's really as I said. There's no need for me to lie to you. I'm an official, and you're bandits. Lying to you won't do me any good. If you rebel again, I'll have to bear the responsibility. After all, I'm in charge of Tianjing Basin now. Beheading all of you will be the end of it. It won't take more than a few months for the winged cavalry to wipe out all the sects from the north to the south. However, I'm sure you can imagine the scene, heads will roll. However, in my opinion, there's no need for that. In fact, I wanted to kill all of you at first so that Tianjing Basin would be stable. Without anyone taking the lead, the remaining people wouldn't be able to stir up any waves. However, after interacting with you for a while, I changed my mind. You're just some people from the martial arts world. You don't have such big ambitions and don't want to be kings or emperors. Your biggest wish is to go out. It doesn't matter if you have nothing better to do, set up a monastery, teach disciples, and occasionally fight with people. These are all trivial matters. No matter how good you are at fighting, can you defeat Her Majesty? Can you defeat the officials in the imperial court? As long as you can be stable, it's not a bad idea to keep you around. Keeping you around will also make it easier to stabilize Tianjing Basin. Everyone here is also Her Majesty's people and will be of use to her in the future. There's no need to kill to increase hatred. In addition, I'm afraid of blood, and I'm afraid of seeing heads rolling on the ground. Therefore, I'm giving you a chance to live. It's also a chance for others to live. Go back and think about it. Someone, take them away and let them think about it. Ren Baqian repeated what he had said to Qing Yun's sword. Then, he rambled on for a long time as if he was babbling. After he finished speaking, he asked someone to take them back to think about it. Principal Ren, why go through so much trouble? Just like what Sir said, everything will be stable after we kill all of them, Gongjing said. That would be great, but to pacify Tianjing Basin, we'll have to put in more effort. Renbochin waved his hand and said, "In the future, the system of Tianjing Basin needs to be changed. With them around, many things will be much easier." Moreover, if they had never met before, it was just some numbers. Killing them was not a big deal. He had come into contact with many people, and they had all become living people in his mind. They had become a part of his memories, so he would keep them if there was no need. In just 1 year, Renbochin had risen from an ordinary person to a high position, and then from an ordinary person to a manual expert. These sudden changes affected his mentality very easily. Previously, he had experienced a life and death assassination. He had been poisoned. He had gone to a certain organization to steal a biological weapon. He had been on the battlefield. He had seen corpses and heads rolling on the ground. He had killed more than one person with his own hands. He had even left the country to escape for his life. Everything he had experienced in the past year reeked of blood. The Empress and the other aboriginals whom he interacted with usually treated killing as something as simple as eating and drinking. These experiences had made his killing intent very strong. Even if an ordinary person became rich overnight, their mentality would change, not to mention what he had experienced. Only with the passage of time would his temperament gradually calm down. The people of Tianjing Basin should be thanking that lass. A few days ago, he had been in contact with that naive and sweet lass, which calmed his mentality a lot. In any case, she was his successor in the Aero world. She was also pitiful and innocent, and he didn't want to see her wandering outside for the rest of her life while carrying the hatred of her country and family. Moreover, if that naive and sweet lass were to wander outside, she would probably be sold to a brothel in a few days. After more than 2 hours, Renbochin finally saw Lin Chaola coming in from outside. Renbochin thought that she would scratch him. After all, he had thrown her to Mount Wu. He didn't expect her to yawn and find an empty house in the backyard to sleep in. It seemed like there was nothing more important than sleeping in her heart. After standing there for a while, Renbochin went to look for Shiwanya and asked him to mobilize another 5,000 soldiers from the Protectorate of the South into Tianjing Basin. At the same time, he contacted Li Qianqiu and asked him to send the 3 kidnapped people from Great Xia to Tianjing Basin. Since they had asked Shiwanya to kidnap their families to Dao, it meant that they had given up on returning to Great Xia in the future. These 3 people could be of some use. At the very least, they could mix some sand into Tianjing Basin. In a large room that looked like a warehouse, it was a little cold and gloomy, and it was more than enough to fit more than 40 people inside. Do you think his words can be trusted? A woman twisted her body and leaned against the wall. This position was much more comfortable. As soon as the Aboriginal soldiers left, she couldn't help but speak up. "I don't believe a word that the thief said. Just like what he said, what's the benefit of lying to us? Maybe there's some conspiracy behind it." "I don't think he's lying," someone said. "Firstly, we are all in his hands and have no control over our lives. There's no need for him to lie to us in this aspect. On the other hand, he's also an outsider to the Aboriginals." As soon as this was said, everyone looked at him. He's an outsider. Even though he was chosen as Qi Zixiao's husband, all his power is based on her intentions. He has no foundation in Dao's imperial court and won't be accepted by anyone. Qi Zixiao can knock him down to the ground with just a thought. What do you mean? He wants to cultivate his own power, a power that doesn't belong to the Aboriginals, to stabilize his position. No one is willing to hand everything over to others. The person who spoke was also a woman in a brocade dress. One of her legs was broken and dragged in a twisted shape. However, she didn't care about the pain in her leg and analyzed the situation for everyone. "Whether it's to let the people of Tianjing Basin leave or to recruit us, it's all based on this. He wants to disrupt the current internal situation in Dao. If we want to stand firm, we need to rely on him. If he wants to stabilize his position, he also needs support. Will the Aboriginals support him? We are the only ones who have this possibility. As soon as this was said, everyone became pensive. If this was the case, the possibility wasn't small. No matter what, and I won't take it lying down. My master and junior died in their hands. If I can't avenge them, am I still human? A man who was missing an arm said while lying on the ground. His eyes were full of resentment. Rinpoche returned to Earth in the afternoon. As soon as he returned to the living room, he heard the sound of a television. He saw the two girls, Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, sitting on the sofa with chips in their hands, wiping their tears as they watched a television series. It was a Korean drama. On the television, two people were separated by life and death. Principal Ren, why do they always get terminal illnesses? Why can't the doctors cure them? Why can't the two of them be together? The terminal illnesses here are really cruel. They are so pitiful. Listening to these two people, it was obvious that they hadn't just watched a television series these few days. Most of the Aboriginals died of old age or in battle. Very few of them died on their sickbeds. Rinpoche thought for a while and said, because they eat too much kimchi. That thing causes cancer. After finishing his sentence, Rinpoche turned his head and saw Shinfeng with a swollen face and a bloody nose. She stood there obediently with her hands in front of her, looking at Rinpoche with tears in her eyes. What happened to you? Rinpoche was startled. Shinfeng didn't just look wronged, but sullen. Chapter 477. Rinpoche looked at Shinfeng and didn't need to guess to know that she was beaten up by Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan. After asking a few questions, he found out what had happened. This house was empty more than half the time, so Shinfeng would sometimes come to check on the progress of the cleaning. It was the same this time. The moment the cleaner left, Shinfeng came and was beaten to the ground by the two as soon as she entered the house. Actually, Shinfeng was quite skilled. Rinpoche guessed that she had a special status after all, but she was beaten black and blue before she could even get close to them. According to them, this was the temporary imperial residence of Her Majesty, and anyone who dared to enter without her permission would be sentenced to death. Even though she brought up Rinpoche, they insisted on waiting for him to return before dealing with her. No matter what she said, they wouldn't listen. Then, Shinfeng was forced to order 2 KFC family buckets for them. If she didn't do as they said, she would be beaten up again. It had been 2 days. Shinfeng was first beaten up and then locked up here for 2 days. She had to eat KFC soybean milk and youtiao every day, plus 2 meals of family buckets. Shinfeng was about to go crazy. After hearing what Shinfeng said, Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He turned to look at them and saw that they were looking at him without any guilt. Go back first and recuperate well. Your salary will be doubled this month. Rinpoche asked Shinfeng to leave before looking at them and asking, did you two beat her up and lock her up here for the KFC family buckets? How is that possible? They said in unison with a guilty conscience. That thing on TV doesn't look delicious. Rinpoche was speechless. Sure enough, Dayo was of the same origin from top to bottom. When they could talk with their fists, they wouldn't use their brains. Every one of them counted, and there was no exception. If their brains were opened, they would probably find a miracle in modern biology. There were only muscles and no brain matter inside. When are we going back? They asked again. They were immersed in the sadness brought about by the after effects of instant noodles and finally remembered that they were still in a foreign land. As for whether the Empress had won, they didn't ask. In their hearts, the Empress was the strongest in the world. Furthermore, the fact that Rinpoche was back in one piece meant everything. Both of you will return with me in a few days, Renbochin said as he went upstairs to change his clothes. After a while, Renbochin said, "Let's go out for a meal." Thinking about how the two of them had come to this world, he couldn't let them stay in this cold house forever. Both of them were overjoyed when they heard Renbochin's words. Both of them had long been interested in the world they had seen on television. However, from this house, they could only see houses and forests in the distance. It was nothing like the liveliness they had seen on television. Renbochin picked up his phone and wanted to give Shenfeng a call. After thinking about it, he simply went online and found a local shop. Then, he paid a high price to get someone to deliver clothes for them to try on. 2 hours later, the two people in front of him had completely changed their appearances. Qin Yuan was wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, while Hong Wan was wearing a blue mid-length dress. Both of them had their hair down. Although their temperaments were a little special and their hair was too long, they looked less conspicuous. On the way from the villa to the city, the two of them sat in the car like curious babies. They were curious about everything, and their faces were almost poking at the car window. Especially Qin Yuan, there was hardly a moment of peace along the way. Renbochin casually answered their questions as he drove. By the time they arrived at the city, it was already evening. The sky was starting to darken, and the street lights and shop lights were lit up. The sight of gold and jade made the two of them gasp in admiration. Just by looking at the splendid and bustling scene in the city, the two of them thought that they had arrived at the world of immortals. At least, compared to the other world where there was nothing, this place was no different from the world of immortals. However, the people here were a little weak and could be slapped down, just like Principal Ren. Now, Principal Ren was more or less stronger and was at least as strong as an ordinary person. In the past, he was like a paper man that could be blown away by the wind. After finding a well-decorated restaurant, the two of them finally had some peace and quiet. After they finished eating and licked their plates clean, Qin Yuan faintly said, "It's not as delicious as the KFC family bucket." Then, she cautiously asked, "Is the KFC family bucket very expensive?" Renbochin almost vomited blood. Could it be that the two of them felt that the KFC family bucket was too expensive and couldn't bear to part with it, so they brought them here to eat it? "When we get back, I will bury the two of you with the KFC family bucket," Renbochin said hatefully. After the meal, Renbochin brought the two of them around the city to show them the luxury they had never seen before. The two of them marveled at everything they saw, and passers-by couldn't help but take a few more glances. After all, how could such beautiful ladies come out of the mountains? Furthermore, there were two of them. In Renbochin's opinion, Dayo was much more remote and poorer than the mountains. These days, there were still televisions and mobile phones in the mountains. For the next few days, Renbochin brought the two of them out from time to time or read some Buddhist scriptures. He always had an idea to spread some of the teachings of Buddhism to Tianjin Basin. After all, when it came to Buddhism, the first thing that came to everyone's mind was to have no desires, to have a pure mind, to lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot, to have good fortune in this life, and to be rewarded in the next life. These teachings were very suitable to be spread to the commoners of Tianjin Basin. After all, one couldn't rely on the hearts of the people, and religion was also a very useful tool. If everyone had no desires, was pure, and wholeheartedly did good deeds without harming their own lives, the world would be peaceful. However, after reading some of the scriptures, he realized that Buddhism was different from what he had in mind. In fact, Buddhism was also a kind of cultivation in order to transcend and reach the eternal realm. The main purpose was still to cultivate in this life. If one couldn't achieve it in this life, they would then cultivate in the next life. Why did everyone think that cultivating in the next life was the main goal? It was because most of the people in the world were ordinary people who didn't focus on cultivation, didn't have great perseverance, and didn't have a good foundation of understanding. Therefore, they could only come into contact with this kind of method. At the same time, this was also in line with the beautiful expectations that ordinary people had for the future. After reading for a few days, Rinpoche became somewhat interested. At the same time, he had more thoughts of spreading Buddhism over. After all, it wasn't a bad thing to spread a religion that taught people to do good deeds. However, what made him hesitate was whether to spread the original Buddhism or to modify it before spreading it. The original Buddhism teachings were ultimately still about cultivation. After modifying it, it would be easier to control the part that focused on accumulating good fortune in the next life. However, there would also be more loopholes and wouldn't be able to withstand scrutiny. After staying for a few days, Rinpoche brought the two of them back. Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were still a little reluctant to part with them. Chapter 478. As soon as the three of them returned to Deo, both of them went out to look for the Empress. However, when the guard at the door saw Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan coming out of Rinpoche's room, he looked at Rinpoche as though he was looking at a beast. Rinpoche carried a bucket of porridge to the backyard and waited for a long time. After eating breakfast with the Empress, he asked someone to bring Qin Yun's sword to the main hole. After a while, Rinpoche saw Qin Yun's sword in the hole. He saw that Qin Yun's sword had aged even more. Rinpoche was worried that Qin Yun's sword would suddenly die one day. "How is it? Have you made up your mind?" Rinpoche asked from his seat of honor. "What do you want me to do?" Qin Yun's sword asked. "The spiritual mountain sect isn't far from here. Go and persuade them to surrender. Of course, someone will go with you. It would be best if they could surrender. If not, I can't keep these troublemakers who are causing chaos in Tianjing Basin." Sealing the mountain, the spiritual mountain sect was not spared. "Their lives will depend on you," Rinpoche said leisurely as he crossed his legs. Qin Yun's sword's expression became even more bitter. His reputation for the rest of his life would probably be ruined. Even if he didn't go, the other party would definitely send someone else. However, it was not difficult for the entire spiritual mountain sect to surrender. It was better for him to make a trip there himself and understand the pros and cons. Perhaps he could persuade them. "I promise you." Qin Yun's sword sighed. "A wise man submits to circumstances. With your status, I'm sure you won't go back on your words. I won't play any other tricks. I'll make some arrangements in a while, and then you can set off. I have another question." Qin Yun's sword raised his head and looked at Rinpoche. "Speak. What's the background of the lady beside you?" Qin Yun's sword stared at Rinpoche and asked. His master's death had always been a thorn in his heart. However, his master had already broken through to the spirit will level and reached the legendary realm, yet he still died there. It had been many years since he had made any progress, and that sword strike from a few days ago had injured his foundation. He was afraid that he would never have the chance to touch that level again, and he would never be able to see for himself what was there. He could only get some information about the depths of the 60,000 mountains from the spirit will expert beside Rinpoche. "You mean Lin Chaola? Someone found him when he was a baby. Do you know what happened?" Rinpoche's curiosity was piqued. Previously, when Qin Yun's sword said that she wasn't human, he guessed that Qin Yun's sword knew something. "Picked it up. Are you trying to deceive this old man?" Qin Yun's sword's eyes emitted a cold light as he asked loudly. After all, he was a spirit will expert. Rinpoche was shocked when he raised his aura. Gongzheng, who was beside him, stepped forward and stared coldly at Qin Yun's sword. "She did indeed pick it up. She picked it up outside the palace. I don't know much about it, but she herself doesn't know much about it. What do you know?" Upon hearing what Rinpoche said, Qin Yun's sword's imposing manner immediately subsided and he no longer spoke. After Rinpoche repeatedly questioned her, she finally told him about her master, which made him click his tongue in wonder. This was the second time he had heard about the spirit will experts. The last one was the founding emperor, who had reached the longevity heaven realm. A cardinal heaven expert was equivalent to a spirit will expert, while a longevity heaven expert was at the same level as Qing Yun Sword's master. However, his combat power should be slightly higher. He was also missing, and he disappeared with a large number of people. This time, it was Qing Yun Sword's master again. Rinpoche made a mental note of this matter. In the future, he would find an opportunity to send someone to investigate. Rinpoche ordered his men to bring the rest of the people here and interrogate them again. More than 40 of them surrendered as he had expected. There were still a few stubborn ones who were dragged away and beheaded. Not long after, someone came in with their heads. Rinpoche waved his hand and said, "You don't have to show me. Find a place to bury them." In the afternoon, Rinpoche found the Empress and ordered a spirit will expert from the Protectorate of the South to accompany Qing Yun's sword to Lingshan with 200 winged cavalry warriors and 200 ordinary soldiers. If they surrendered, they would kidnap them and take back all the valuables to replenish the national treasury. After all, the Northeast and Southeast were still at war. If they didn't surrender, they would massacre the Lingshan sect and take back all the valuables. As the #1 sect in Tianjin Basin, they should have some assets. Subsequently, 200 winged cavalry warriors and 200 ordinary cavalrymen were sent to lead a few small sects in the same direction. They would go to each sect and plunder if they surrendered. If they didn't surrender, they would be slaughtered. With 200 earth will experts, as long as they didn't encounter a spirit will expert who had condensed a heaven-grade weapon, they could do whatever they wanted in Tianjin Basin. After arranging for these two groups of people to set off, Rinpoche made some arrangements. After one day, he personally led 200 winged cavalry warriors and Lin Chaola to the Golden Ring residence. While Rinpoche was still on the road, Qing Yun's sword and the others arrived at the foot of Lingshan. The Lingshan sect was named after this place. The mountain gate was at the foot of the mountain. It was a tall stone gate with the words Lingshan written on it. Anyone who saw it for the first time would immediately be attracted by the words. It was said that these two words contained a set of swordplay. There was once an expert who came to challenge the Lingshan sect and saw these words in front of the mountain gate. After standing there for 3 days, he comprehended the set of swordplay, bowed, and left. Later, when the Lingshan sect encountered a formidable enemy, he even made a move to repel the enemy. That person's descendants had always lived in Tianjin Basin. There were still descendants, but they had already declined. This was recorded in the ancient books of the Lingshan sect. From the mountain gate all the way to the waist of the mountain, there were steps made of white stones. The steps were as smooth as jade and hadn't been damaged for hundreds of years. There were hundreds of thousands of steps winding up the mountain like a white snake. In this world, it was unknown how much manpower and material resources were needed to build such a mountain path. What was even more precious were these stones, and each piece was very expensive. The winged cavalry warriors' eyes lit up when they saw these stone steps. Principal Ren had said to take away the valuable things, and these stone steps looked good. The winged cavalry warriors had interacted with him a lot and knew his position in the Empress's heart. As such, they were very attentive to his words. "Wait for me here. I'll go up and persuade them," Qing Yun's sword said to the other spirit will expert. The spirit will expert leading the team was called Qing Ping. He was the captain of Zhichong in the Protectorate of the South and was a rank 4 official. He was the #1 person below Shi Wanya and the Deputy Protector General. 2 hours. Qing Ping said in a deep voice. After 2 hours, regardless of whether you succeed or not, I will lead my men and bathe this Lingshan in blood. Qing Yun's sword cupped his hands and disappeared in front of everyone. He appeared on the steps and disappeared in a flash. Less than an hour after Qing Yun's sword went up, Qing Ping sensed two auras colliding on the mountain. It was a battle between spirit wool experts. "Sir, do you want to go up?" the captain of the winged cavalry asked. "Wait," Qing Ping said in a deep voice. The battle stopped after the time it took for an incense stick to burn. After another hour, Qing Yun's sword came down from the mountain. Qing Yun's sword's face was pale, and his clothes were wet. It looked like he had been spat on. "General, they have surrendered." Following his words, more than 300 people came down from the mountain. They were all dressed in green, and there were both men and women. There were even infants in swaddling clothes. The leader was an old man who set his sights on Qing Ping as soon as he came down. He had fought with Qing Ping before, but it was only a draw when the three of them worked together. "We have surrendered," the old man said bitterly. "There are quite a lot of people." "Tie them up," Qing Ping said in a deep voice. The hundreds of people immediately became restless. "According to Her Majesty's orders, if anyone resists, the entire Lingshan will be exterminated without mercy," Qing Ping said murderously. "Silence," the old man turned around and shouted. Chapter 479. What are you smelling? Renbochin couldn't help but ask when he saw Lin Chaola sniffing his body. In fact, for the past 2 days, he had noticed that Lin Chaola especially liked to sleep next to him. Every day when she woke up, she would walk around him and sniff him. If it weren't for Lin Chaola, Renbochin would have suspected that his charm was off the charts. "Oh, it smells good and fragrant." Lin Chaola was a little intoxicated. Renbochin smelled himself suspiciously. The perfume had already been given to the Empress, and now, there was only a very diluted stench on his body. However, those winged cavalry warriors had intentionally distanced themselves from him for the past 2 days. How could Lin Chaola say that he smelled good? Could it be that Lin Chaola liked the smell of stinky tofu? What a strange hobby. He didn't know if she liked smelly socks and feet that hadn't been washed for a month. If she did, he could satisfy her. Everyone rested for less than an hour before continuing their journey. After another half a day, they finally arrived at the Golden Ring residence and could see the mountain gate from afar. At this time, a group of people were busy packing up their things in the Golden Ring residence. They didn't even care about the small items that fell to the ground. It was a chaotic scene everywhere, as if they were fleeing for their lives. Zhang Chongkong looked at everything in the residence with some reluctance on his face. However, he understood very well that they couldn't stay in the north. The army of the Protectorate of the South was heading south. It would only take a few days to reach here, and they wouldn't be able to defend themselves no matter what. Only by reaching the south, gathering many sects, recruiting more soldiers, and relying on the steep terrain would they barely be able to resist the winged cavalry. However, he didn't have much hope that they could resist the winged cavalry. "In my opinion, why don't we go over Mount Wangduan, go to the Qin nation, and then make a detour to the Yun nation?" Painting Fairy suggested. "I can go, you can go, but they can't," Zhang Chongkong said in a deep voice. Mount Wangduan, heartbroken. Even though they could cross the earth will level, they could only carry one more person. At most, a dozen of them could escape. What about the rest? Some of the people in the residence had grandfathers and fathers who were disciples of the Golden Ring residents and had served the residents for generations. How could he abandon them and escape alone? "Father, are we really leaving?" Zhang Kaixian walked over from the courtyard and asked reluctantly. She was still hugging her beloved vase. "I'll be back." How could Zhang Chongkong be willing to leave? How could he be willing to give up his foundation? However, the Golden Ring residents didn't have any power that could resist the Aboriginal army. Furthermore, there weren't any precipitous terrain. How could they defend it? Manor Lord, bad news. Manor Lord. Why are you in such a panic? Zhang Chongkong frowned. The ancient race is here. We're not far from the mountain gate. So fast. Bring Xian away. I'll bring people to face the enemy. Zhang Chongkong was taken aback at first. To think that the ancient race had arrived faster than he had expected. He had only been back for 2 days, and the ancient race had already arrived. Now was not the time to hesitate. He instructed Painting Fairy and strode forward. Halfway through, he stopped and said, "If I die, take Xian Air and leave. The further, the better. Go to the Yun Nation or Great Xia. Don't think about revenge." "Father!" Zhang Kaixian cried out in alarm. Painting Fairy revealed a mournful expression. However, she had wandered in the underworld before and wasn't wishy-washy. She pulled Zhang Kaixian and was about to leave the mountain. When the Golden Ring residence was first built, they had considered the possibility of foreign enemies invading. As such, there were arrow towers in the residence, which were also dark alleys for people to hide in. Even though he didn't know how useful they would be, Zhang Chongkong still made arrangements for everyone and brought a few attendants to the mountain gate. On the horizon ahead, a group of cavalrymen was advancing. They weren't fast, but everyone's hearts tightened. Regardless of which sect it was, there was no one who wouldn't feel fear when faced with the approaching aboriginal cavalry. They weren't afraid of that group of cavalrymen, but of what they represented. "Manor Lord, it's the winged cavalry," someone said with a deathly pale face after looking around for a long time. Once this was said, everyone was terrified. "Let the young disciples leave." "Attendant Chu, you leave too," Zhang Chongkong said. Since it was the winged cavalry that had arrived, those young disciples wouldn't be of much use. Even the people around them wouldn't be of any use. Since that was the case, it was better to let the young disciples leave and leave some seeds behind. As for Attendant Chu, even though his martial arts weren't the best, he had the most diverse knowledge and could pass down as many martial arts techniques as possible. As for the rest, Zhang Chongkong turned around and looked at the people behind him with an apologetic gaze. Someone had to stay behind to buy time for the rest. "We will advance and retreat together with the Manor Lord," a attendant shouted. "After staying in the residence for decades, I'm old now. I can't move anymore and don't want to leave," another attendant said with a smile. "After keeping them for decades, we'll get rid of them one last time." "Damn it," another deacon with a pale face and scholarly appearance said in a coarse voice. This deacon was originally a bandit from a mountain. Later on, he robbed the Golden Ring residence and his entire stronghold was destroyed. It wasn't easy for him to escape with his life. In the end, he decided to climb back up from where he had fallen and actually entered the Golden Ring residence. He stayed there for decades and even became an attendant. Zhang Chongkong looked at everyone with tears in his eyes. He pursed his lips and said, "I'm not alone in this life. I'm not alone." Everyone laughed. Even the strong enemies in the distance weren't that scary anymore. It was just death. He wasn't alone in this life, and he would have company on the road to the underworld. As the cavalry approached, Zhang Chongkong could already see the people in front and Renbaqian in the crowd. "I've been deceived by him." Zhang Chongkong was somewhat indignant. If it weren't for him, they wouldn't have reached such a state and Chief Elder wouldn't have died in battle. It was that woman beside him who beat Chief Elder to death. Every time he thought of this, his heart was filled with regret. He didn't expect that he would be the one to annihilate the Golden Ring residence. When he thought of how he almost gave his daughter to Renbaqian, he simply wanted to laugh. His laughter was filled with sorrow and indignation. When they were about 100 meters away from the mountain gate, Renbaqian asked the troops to stop. At this moment, there were more than 30 people standing at the mountain gate. Other than the 7 or 8 Earth Will experts at the front, the rest were all Man Will experts. With such strength, it was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot in front of the winged cavalry. Renbochin clamped the 4-corned cow's abdomen, and it slowly moved forward and stopped in front of the troops. You actually have the cheek to stand here. I was really blind back then. Zhang Chongkong scolded. I purposely came here to give you a way out. Otherwise, the Golden Ring residents wouldn't need me to summon you. Renbochin shook his head. Surrender. All of you just want to go out. In fact, this is what I want to do. It's such a waste to leave so many people in Tianjing Basin unused. This time, I came here with the intention of letting the people of Tianjing Basin gradually go out and live together with the Aboriginals. Isn't that what all of you want to see? Stop with your flowery words. I won't surrender even if I have to die. If you have the ability, come and take my head yourself. A white-faced deacon scolded angrily. Renbochin had some impression of this person as he was one of the deacons in the inner sanctum. Although he looked like a gigolo, he was actually very boorish. However, he still looked like a gigolo at the age of 50 or 60, which really made people envious. A monk doesn't lie. I'm the principal of the Black Bamboo Academy and a secondary class, rank 4 official. Why would I lie to you ruffians? Moreover, if I wanted to, I could flatten the Golden Ring residents in minutes. Under such circumstances, why would I waste my breath to deceive all of you? This is the only way out for all of you. I presume that you have already arranged for people to leave through the mountains. Renbochin asked faintly. Since the other party was already waiting at the entrance, they definitely wouldn't leave everyone in the residence to die. Send 100 people to the mountains to capture everyone, Renbochin said to the people behind him. Keep them alive. If they resist, break their limbs, but keep them alive. You traitor, you will die a horrible death. Someone in the crowd cursed angrily. The people in the residence had just left not long ago, so how could they escape the pursuit of 100 Earth Will experts? Renbochin tilted his head and realized that he had become the big devil that everyone hated. Speaking of which, he came to the community to send warmth. These people were really kind-hearted, yet they were ked by dogs. Are you surrendering? If you surrender, as long as you don't go against the imperial court in the future and know your place, I will naturally guarantee your safety. If you want to leave Tianjing Basin, you just need to apply for a temporary identification card and a temporary residence permit. You can even go to Lan City and live under the Emperor's rule. If you don't surrender, I will be kind enough to let your whole family stay together. Even if he runs away to Great Xia, I will find him and send him to reunite with all of you. What's that saying again? The most important thing for a family is to stay together. If 1 or 2 of you are missing, it will be too cruel. Dear benefactors, the sea of bitterness is boundless, repent, and the shore is at hand. Now, are you going to surrender or not? Or will you only regret it when everyone's heads are placed here? Renbochin had been speaking lightly, but when he reached the last 2 sentences, his voice became stern and his eyebrows raised. Are you going to surrender? Are you going to surrender? Are you going to surrender? The 100 winged cavalry warriors behind him shouted at the same time, and their voices shook the sky. Under the protection of 100 winged cavalry warriors, Renbochin was like a devil king. Everyone at the mountain gate was prepared to die and felt that they were fearless. However, under this pressure, they were moved and subconsciously took a step back. Chapter 480. We surrendered. Zhang Chongkong's face was ashen when he said this. The people behind Zhang Chongkong moved their lips, but they didn't say anything in the end. Renbochin's words disintegrated their fighting spirit in several ways. Firstly, the Aboriginals didn't have a tradition of surrendering, so they could only fight to the death. Secondly, the goal of most of them was to leave Tianjing Basin or simply follow the prefecture chief. Renbaqian's words included the former, which reduced their resistance. As for the latter, even the chief had surrendered. Did they really have to court death? Thirdly, it didn't matter if most of them died, but it would be too cruel if their family members were killed as well. Either all of them lived or all of them died. There wasn't a middle option, which made them cower again. That's right. A wise man submits to circumstances. Renbaqian nodded. That little girl wouldn't have to wander the world alone and end up being kidnapped and sold to a brothel. If his only disciple, who was skilled in arrow, ended up playing the arrow in a brothel, how could he bear it? However, at this moment, someone walked out from the crowd. Everyone was shocked when they saw his actions. Deacon Peng. What are you going to do? So be it if you surrender. I don't blame you and won't implicate you. Great Elder has been very kind to me. I'm not capable enough to avenge him, and I don't have the face to live on. I might as well go down to look for Great Elder and serve him by his side. A person stood 10 meters away from the crowd and looked straight at Renbaqian. It was the pale-faced deacon from before. When he said this, everyone immediately revealed a look of shame on their faces. Even Zhang Changkong's face revealed a moved expression. A few people behind him moved slightly to the side, and then a person walked out from the crowd and stood beside Deacon Peng, saying, I'm all alone, and I've lived long enough. I'll accompany you on your journey. Me too. Great Elder has been good to me. I'll go down to look for him too. Me too. 5 or 6 people walked to Deacon Peng's side in succession. There was even an inner deacon among them. This made more people waver. Even Zhang Changkong looked like he was struggling. Renbaqian somewhat admired these people. They risked their lives and shed their blood because of their passion. However, this was also their weakness. They were too easily hot-blooded. Especially Zhang Changkong. As the leader of a sect, he was actually influenced by others and did not care about his wife and children. He was simply a good-for-nothing. Originally, he had a good impression of Zhang Changkong. After all, he was the one who sent his daughter over. However, after this incident, she looked down on him a lot. Renbaqian sat on the back of the 4-corned cow and said coldly, This is a matter of life and death, yet you're being influenced by others. Sometimes you surrender, and sometimes you don't. You don't have any opinion of your own. To put it nicely, you people value loyalty and friendship. To put it bluntly, they're just a bunch of brainless boors. As soon as Renbaqian said this, other than those who had stepped forward, everyone else lowered their heads. Zhang Changkong also sighed and glanced at Deacon Peng and the rest with a guilty gaze. Deacon Peng said in a carefree manner, head, you don't have to be like this. This is my own choice. Brothers, we'll take our leave first. When we meet again in the future, we'll drink and chat merrily. Renbaqian had a look of admiration in his eyes. This attendant Peng was pretty good. He had a firm grasp of his own heart and was clear about things. What a pity. It wasn't only him. Many of the winged cavalry warriors behind her also had a look of admiration in their eyes. After all, they were men who had fought bloody battles on the battlefield and liked to talk about life and death the most. Renbaqian waved his hand and said, Send them on their way. Sir Ren, I'll go. One of the winged cavalry warriors cupped his hands at Renbaqian, leaped forward, drew his sword in mid-air, and slashed at Deacon Peng below. A few rays of sword light flashed, and heads flew into the sky one by one. Dig a hole and bury them. Tie up the rest and inform the people from before that those at the foot of the mountain have surrendered. Be more lenient, Renbaqian instructed. After Zhang Changkong and the rest had their hands tied up, Renbaqian rode his mount toward the Golden Ring residence. Before him, 10 people had entered the residence to see if there were any ambushes or assassins. When Renbochin entered the residence, he saw that the ground was in a mess. There were also some maids who didn't manage to escape in time and were kneeling and trembling at the side. He still remembered the location of the main hall of the Golden Ring residence. Without anyone leading the way, he arrived at the main hall by himself. He looked up and saw that the 17 beads were no longer there. "Sir, what do we do next?" A winged cavalry captain came in and asked. "See what else is there. Pack up all the valuable things. Ask those people outside. They know best where the valuable things are. Also, ask them to hand over the 17 beads that were originally here." Renbochin muttered to himself for a while and said, "Ask them if they have a library or something like that. Take out all the secret manuals in the residence. They can make a copy of it as an inheritance and take the original copy with them." He had just thought of the secret manuals. After all, he had plagiarized so many sects in Tianjin Basin, especially these big sects, and there might be some good things. Since he couldn't use them, it would be good to take them back to enrich Qingxin Palace Hall. He could also bring them back to Earth and hand them over to the nation. The more secret manuals there were, the better the effect of using a supercomputer to deduce martial arts. After all, a supercomputer wasn't an immortal, and it required sufficient information to make better deductions. Just like AlphaDog, it wouldn't be able to reach that level without tens of thousands of chess games recorded in the database. At night, those who wanted to escape from the mountains were all caught and brought back. Zhang Chongkong had been locked in a room. When he saw Painting Fairy and Zhang Kaixian being tied up and thrown in, Zhang Caixian's face was red and swollen, and both of her arms were broken. He immediately smiled bitterly. When Painting Fairy saw Zhang Chongkong in the room, the panic in her eyes quickly subsided. She smiled and asked, "Do I look ugly now?" "No. You have always been so beautiful." Zhang Chongkong shook his head. "When I came up the mountain, I wondered if I had forgotten something. Later on, I remembered that I said that if you died, would accompany you. However, I was worried about Xian, and afraid that she wouldn't be able to persevere. It's fine now. I don't have to think so much. We are a family now, so it doesn't matter if I die," Painting Fairy said with affection in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Zhang Chongkong said sadly. "There's nothing to be sorry about. Life and death are all fated." Painting Fairy smiled. "It has been hard on Xian. It's not hard on me. I'm very happy being with my parents." Zhang Chongkong saw that his wife and daughter were in such a state and felt even more dejected. He then pulled himself together and said, "However, it seems that I won't die for now." After that, he repeated what Renbochin had said. "Because of this, I surrendered." Painting Fairy smiled. "I knew that my husband wasn't someone who was afraid of death. Seeing that you are fine, I knew that there must be a reason." Zhang Chongkong felt even more guilty after hearing this. Renbochin spent the whole night checking the treasures and secret manuals that he had plundered. There were many valuable things. After all, they were accumulated by the Golden Ring residents over many years. Just the value of the 17 pearls alone was immeasurable. As for the secret manuals, he simply flipped through them and put them down. He couldn't tell if they were good or bad. He then asked someone to pass the secret manuals and paper to Zhang Chongkong so that he could find someone to copy them and leave them as the inheritance of the Golden Ring residents. This action also made the people of the Golden Ring residents feel completely at ease. They knew that Renbochin really didn't intend to kill them. The next day, Renbochin asked Zhang Chongkong to arrange for people to contact the disciples of the residents in the surrounding cities to surrender. After all, the Golden Ring residents had been entrenched here for many years. Apart from the people in the residence, there were also many disciples who were officials in the surrounding cities. Their relationships were complicated, and they had a huge network of connections. When the second batch of 5,000 soldiers from the Protectorate of the South entered Tianjin Basin, 3 of the 5 cities immediately opened their gates and surrendered. Chapter 481. Early in the morning, more than 100 disciples of the Golden Ring residents stood together with their hands tied with ropes. In fact, these ropes weren't used to imprison them, but rather to remind them of their identities. In front of 200 winged cavalry warriors, 100 people would at most be turned into a pile of blood after a single charge. Previously, when Renbachian asked them to copy a secret manual for the inheritance of the Golden Ring residents, they were relieved and naturally wouldn't do anything too unwise. Zhang Kaixian was standing among this group of people. A few days ago, she was still the daughter of the chief of the Golden Ring residents and was doted on by everyone. Now, she had become a prisoner. This sudden change in identity, coupled with the experience of escaping and being captured, made her grow up a lot overnight. Occasionally, she turned to look at the disciples in the residence and saw that most of them looked dejected. No one spoke. More than 100 people stood there and barely made a sound. Zhang Kaixian heard footsteps and saw Renbachian at the entrance of the courtyard. The last time she saw him, he was still an envoy from the Yun nation. He knew how to roast delicious food and teach her the arrow. She had never been in contact with a man day and night, and she even started to like him. However, this time around, he was an official of Dayo and the husband of the Empress, Qi Zixiao. It was because of him that her family had fallen into such a plight. It was also because of him that she could reunite with her parents and didn't have to worry about losing her life. This gave her an indescribable feeling. This feeling was very complicated, and she couldn't describe it. She didn't know whether it was hatred or not. She didn't even know how to hate someone and what it was like to hate someone. Did he see me? Zhang Kaixian seemed to see Renbachian's gaze lingering on her face for a moment. Her heart skipped a beat, and she lowered her head slightly. Why did he come to the Golden Ring residence? The closest sect to Wu City is the Lingshan sect, which is also the biggest sect in Tianjin Basin. Not only is the Golden Ring residence ranked last among the 8 big sects, but it's also very far away. Why did he come here? Zhang Kaixian lowered her head and began to let her imagination run wild. Renbachian swept his gaze across the crowd and indeed saw her, but he didn't stop at all. To him, this little girl was somewhat interesting and pitiful. Furthermore, she was the only successor of his arrow. At least she had a pair of sharp ears and could tell that his arrows sounded nice. A bosom friend, a high mountain and flowing water. Yu Boya and Zhong Ziqi. Just because of this, he had to personally make a trip to the Golden Ring residence, lest others came over and killed everyone in the Golden Ring residence. Therefore, it wasn't wrong to say that he was here for her. It was just that there was no romantic love between them. Now that he knew that she wasn't dead, he could put his worries to rest. In the future, the arrow world will depend on you to make it flourish. We'll head back first. Bring them back to Wu City. The reinforcements from the Protectorate of the South should be arriving soon. Keep an eye out for them. If there are cities that rebel and the Protectorate of the South's attack isn't going well, you can send people to help them according to the situation, Renbachian said as he walked. 200 people didn't seem like much. However, 200 earth-will-level winged cavalry warriors could do a lot of things. 50 people were enough to escort them to Wu City. In Tianjin Basin, 50 people could even break through a small city. Understood. The winged cavalry captain cupped his fists and replied. As for the food and drinks along the way, let Zhan Chongkong arrange it himself. I'm sure he'll arrange for good men to bring you food along the way. In addition, since they've surrendered, I might need them in the future. As long as they don't rebel, don't bother with them. If they really want to rebel, kill one person for each rebellion. If more than half of them rebel, kill all of them and report to me. However, I don't think this will happen. Renbochin turned his head and looked at the people in the courtyard. Go back and make the arrangements. Renbochin waved his hand after he finished speaking, and the captain immediately withdrew. Renbochin first brought some people back to Wu City as there were still many things that needed to be dealt with. The 50 winged cavalry warriors escorted these people and plundered their belongings and set off at the same time. However, their speed was much slower, so they had to split into 2 groups. At present, there were only 100 winged cavalry warriors in the residence. The rest had been sent out 2 days ago to wipe out the surrounding small sects like the Nine-Blade sect. A week later, Renbochin returned to Wu City again. From afar, he could see the original guards of Wu City, which surprised him a little. He didn't know if something had happened. When he arrived at the city gate, he found that the original guards of Wu City were inspecting the city. A few winged cavalry warriors were standing on top of the city wall with their arms crossed. When they saw that Renbochin had returned, they hurriedly went back to report. After half a month, Wu City had more or less regained some liveliness. At the very least, some pedestrians could be seen walking in the city. However, they lowered their heads and walked very quickly, as if they were afraid of attracting attention. As for the shops in the city, they were open. Occasionally, 1 or 2 people would go in to buy something and then leave in a hurry. After returning to the residence, Renbochin first went to see the Empress. Seeing that she was talking to Shiwanya, Renbochin knocked on the door sill, strode in, and said, "Your Majesty, I'm back." The Empress glanced at him and said to Shiwanya, "You may leave first." After Shiwanya left, Renbochin smiled and said, "Your Majesty, I missed you so much." The Empress picked up a fruit and asked faintly, "How did it go?" "Everything went smoothly. There's no more sugar. I got it. I will go back tonight." "Your Majesty, do you want to take a stroll?" After saying this, Renbochin moved closer to the Empress and sniffed. The Empress pressed her palm on his nose. "What are you doing? The smell has finally dissipated." Renbochin laughed. At this time, the Empress's body had regained its original body fragrance. It would have been better if Renbochin hadn't mentioned this, but the Empress's face immediately turned black. If it wasn't for him, how could that have happened? Every time she thought about it, she wanted to bury Renbochin in the wall, leaving only his head outside so that she could casually hit him to vent her anger. Over the past 2 days, many people have been sent to the city. You decide how to deal with them. Kill those who deserve to be killed, the Empress said in a cold tone. The Empress spoke in a cold tone. She didn't really care about the life and death of those people. However, it seemed like Renbochin had some plans for them. "I will go and deal with it now. I still have some hot pot seasonings. Why don't we have hot pot tonight?" "All right." Renbochin bade farewell to the Empress and went out to inquire about the recent events. There were a few things that had happened. The 3 major factions had revolted, and many sects had joined in. This increased the number of Earth Will experts in the 3 major factions, and there were even some Spirit Will experts in charge. Fortunately, Renbochin had arranged for people to persuade the Lingshan sect and some other sects to surrender. The area around these sects was basically calm and peaceful. Currently, there were only a few cities in the north rebelling, and it wasn't a big deal. On the contrary, the south of Wu City was almost united. Some of the sects in the north were also clear that the north wasn't a big deal, and staying in the north would only lead to death. After returning from Wu City, they brought their entire sects to the south and strengthened the power of the 3 major factions. When Renbochin heard this news, he stood there for a while before asking someone to call Qingyun's sword over. "Do you know about the 3 major factions revolting?" Qingyun's sword nodded silently. "Arrange for people to contact those sections. If an individual participates, 9 familial exterminations will be carried out. If more than 1/3 of the sects participate, the entire sect will be slaughtered. Give them 1 month to report to Wu City. Those who don't arrive within the time limit will be killed. If they are late by 1 day, they will die. This 1/3 number is divided into man-will and earth-will experts. As long as there is 1/3 of the man-will experts, the entire sect will be annihilated. Even if there are only 3 earth-will experts in the sect, if one of them participates in the rebellion, regardless of whether the other man-will experts or earth-will experts are involved, the entire sect will be turned into ashes. If they want to save their lives, kill the rebels and report to Wu City. I will ensure their safety. After hearing Rinpoche's words, Qingyun's sword immediately raised his head and said, "This is too overbearing. After all, many sects have people in military positions. You are forcing them to their deaths. That's their business. Otherwise, how would I know if they aren't stepping on 2 fence-sitters? Moreover, I don't want to spend too much effort on them. What I want is the people of Tianjin Basin. As for these practitioners, I have already given them a way to live. Whether they can grasp it or not is their own business. If they want to live, I think it won't be difficult to kill them unintentionally, right? Well, on account of the fact that some of their sects have joined the rebellion, some of them may not be willing to wallow in the mire with the others, but they are willing to turn over a new leaf in this filthy land. I will also give such people a chance. You just need to bring the head of a fellow disciple of the same level. Remember, it must be a fellow disciple. You can't just casually kill someone. This is called proof of allegiance." After Rinpoche finished speaking, Qingyun's sword stared at him fiercely and was speechless. His face was full of pain. Vicious, too vicious. Chapter 482. At night, Rinpoche was soaking in the bathtub. Surrounded by warm water, he moaned comfortably. It took him more than half a month to travel to and from the Golden Ring residence, and his body felt like it was falling apart. He couldn't wait to take a bath and relax after returning to Earth. As a northerner, he loved to take a bath. Taking a bath for a while could eliminate most of his fatigue. He turned on the television while taking a bath. The first thing that appeared was the news. First was the new air traffic control regulations. Recently, flying motorcycles were becoming more and more common on television. Some of the wealthier people in the country bought them from overseas. This time, the country reacted quickly and immediately introduced new air traffic control regulations. Flying equipment like flying motorcycles had to be approved by the relevant departments before they could be used. However, ordinary people knew that it was impossible to obtain such approval. The next piece of news was related to him. It was about the golden medicine. This was the business of the 2 medical projects that he and the Qin family were collaborating on. To be more precise, it was an entire pharmaceutical company that controlled the pharmaceutical factories under its banner. The laboratory was completely independent of this pharmaceutical company. Rinpoche watched for a while and realized that it was about the new leukemia drug. In fact, the new drug was still in clinical trials and hadn't been put into production yet. However, it seemed to be effective as it was directly on the news. Due to Rinpoche's special status, the cooperation with the Qin family was considered smooth sailing. Along the way, there were people protecting and giving them the green light. Everything went smoothly. After watching the news, Rinpoche switched off the television, changed his clothes, and went downstairs. The Empress was still sitting there eating ice cream and watching a television series. Rinpoche felt as if he had seen this scene hundreds or thousands of times. Almost every time he was on Earth, he would see the Empress in this posture. Rinpoche scooted over to the Empress's side and sat down. He conveniently picked up the ice cream that the Empress had placed on the table and was about to put it into his mouth. A gust of wind blew past, and Renbochin looked at the Empress with his empty hands. In her left hand was a chocolate bar and in her right was a snowman. Sure enough, it wasn't easy to snatch food from the Empress's mouth. Renbochin leaned back. "There's someone outside," the Empress said after finishing the chocolate and throwing the ice cream stick into the trash can. "Who?" "I don't know." After the Empress finished speaking, the doorbell rang. Renbochin shuffled his slippers and opened the door. He saw a dirty little baldy in a gray monk's robe standing in front of the door and looking up at him. He was about 8 or 9 years old and looked rather likable with red lips and white teeth. However, what's with the tears in his eyes? "Arhat, I've finally found you." The little monk pouted and looked like he was about to cry. "I mistook you for someone else." Boom! Renbochin immediately closed the door. "Ridiculous." Renbochin mumbled and was about to leave when the doorbell rang again. "You got the wrong person." Renbochin opened the door and said seriously. "Master asked me to look for you," the little monk said pitifully. "You have mistaken me for someone else. I'm not Arhat, and I don't know your master." If it were someone else, he would have beaten him up. He really couldn't bear to hurt a 7 or 8-year-old little monk. After realizing this, Renbochin suddenly realized why he couldn't defeat Tonglan. "Too small, I can't do it." Renbochin sighed. He was still too soft-hearted and should ask the Empress to change his opponent when he returned. "My master is the abbot of the Jingxin Temple in the East Sea, Su Wen. He said that he had met you once." The little monk said quickly. He picked up a yellow bundle from the ground and opened it, revealing 4 peaches inside. As soon as he opened it, a fragrant and sweet smell wafted out and filled the entire door. The smell even drifted into the room. Renbochin stared blankly for a moment and recalled the delicate and pretty monk that he had met before. He had indeed met him once. However, was this little monk really looking for him? How did he find him? Why was he looking for him? "These are spiritual peaches from the temple. Master asked me to bring 4 for you, Arhat," the little monk said while wiping his saliva. The smell was really tempting. Not to mention him, even Renbochin couldn't help but reach out. The smell of the peaches was really tempting. This was the first time Renbochin had seen a peach that could emit such a sweet smell. He couldn't eat it, but he could smell it just by holding it there. Furthermore, it made him salivate. What a fragrant smell. The Empress's voice sounded behind Renbochin. "Xing Ruo greets Lady Benefactor. Master asked me to bring these over." The little monk raised the yellow bundle in his hand. A jade-like hand passed by Renbochin and 2 peaches went missing. Renbochin was speechless. Since the Empress had already taken the peaches from Renbochin, there was no way she wouldn't allow Renbochin to enter the house. Renbochin had already taken the peaches from Renbochin. However, this monk Su Wen was really weird. Could it be that these 4 peaches were part of his plan? Renbochin thought what he said previously was a coincidence. This time, it couldn't be a coincidence that this little monk found him, right? The image of that gigolo in his mind immediately became unfathomable. "Come in." Renbochin stepped aside. "Yes." The little monk put his palms together and entered the room. "Sit." Renbochin brought the little monk into the room and pointed to the sofa opposite him. "Why did your master ask you to look for me?" Renbochin asked. As Renbochin spoke, a crunching sound came from the side. In the blink of an eye, a peach entered the Empress's stomach. "Master said that my opportunity lies with Arhat." The little monk tried his best not to look at the Empress eating the peach while drooling. He put his palms together and said to Renbochin. "What opportunity?" "The opportunity to attain enlightenment." "Who am I?" How did you know that Suwon asked you to look for me? Why did he call me Arhat? You are Bodhisattva and Arhat. Because Arhat walks the path of Bodhisattva, you are naturally Arhat, Xing Ruo said. What's the path of Bodhisattva? Ren Bachin frowned. There is the great wish of salvation, self-cultivation, and salvation for all sentient beings. This is the path of Bodhisattva. The little monk put his palms together and said, Arhat walks the path of Bodhisattva, which is a good deed. It is the goal of all cultivators. Ren Bachin sat there motionlessly and frowned. Was this Suwon really that godly? Ren Bachin had just thought of spreading Buddhism to Tianjin Basin so that the people there would believe in Buddhism and be more honest. However, Suwon gave him the title of an Arhat and even sent him a monk. The great wish of salvation. Ren Bachin wanted to spread the religion of science and technology in the other world. He wanted to combine science with martial arts, and his original intention wasn't to spread Buddhism. Salvation for all sentient beings. Ren Bachin wanted to spread technology to that world, increase productivity, and improve people's lives. Was this considered salvation for all sentient beings? Or was this salvation for all sentient beings referring to the teachings of Buddhism? No matter what, this was too coincidental. It was so coincidental that it scared Ren Bachin. Could it be that what he said previously really meant something? Did he know what he wanted to do this time? Was there really such a person in this world? How was this possible? What did your master say when you came? Ren Bachin asked. Master said that I'm already a big boy and should snatch men from women, and women from men. The little monk said innocently. Ren Bachin stared at Xing Ruo. Did Suwon say this? That unfathomable pretty boy monk. Suwon, you are quite mischievous. At first glance, he felt that these words were quite mischievous. However, after thinking about it carefully, these words had a deeper meaning. This fruit. The Empress had been silent since she ate a peach and only spoke now. Is there a problem? Ren Bachin stood up and asked. It's quite delicious. Chapter 483. This fruit is very beneficial for your cultivation, the Empress said to Ren Bachin. It's also very effective for my injuries. Originally, I needed 10 days to recover. After eating this fruit, the damage to my body has been mostly healed. If not for my injuries, this fruit should be able to improve my cultivation a little. It's already considered a rare item. So effective. Ren Bachin raised his eyebrows in astonishment. Although he knew from the taste that this fruit wasn't ordinary, he didn't expect it to be so effective. On Earth, it could be considered a treasure. Even in that world, it could be considered priceless. One had to know how powerful the Empress was. She could release a sound like a mountain torrent when her blood and chi flowed through her body. She was one of the most powerful people in the world. To be able to improve her cultivation a little would be extremely useful to Ren Bachin. He didn't expect Earth to have such a rare treasure. Furthermore, Suwon actually sent 4 of them at once. Ren Bachin wouldn't believe that Suwon didn't know anything. What made Ren Bachin uncertain was, what exactly did Monk Suwon know? Could it be that there were deities in the sky overlooking all living beings? Did his ability to travel back and forth have anything to do with them? Some thoughts flashed through his mind, but he smiled and said, since it's beneficial to your majesty, you can eat all of them. Although it's beneficial, it's still a little effective. However, it's very useful to you. It nourishes your whole body and replenishes your blood and chi. It's very effective, but it's gentle and won't cause you any harm. Instead, it will mend your body and benefit your future cultivation. These days, your cultivation progress is too slow. Eat it and you can catch up. After finishing her words, the Empress pushed the 3 peaches in front of him. Her ears were red as she leaned against the wall. It was unknown if she was thinking about the promise she made with Renbochin. After Renbochin attained the earth will level and stabilized, he could marry the Empress. Pushing these 3 peaches to him seemed to make him feel that she couldn't wait any longer. However, this peach was indeed very beneficial to Renbochin. Not only could it increase his strength, but it could also mend some of his injuries. This peach. Is it precious in the temple? Renbochin looked at the little monk and asked. He had some ideas about this peach. There is only one peach tree in the temple that produces the best peaches. There are only 8 peaches a year, and this is 4 of them, the little monk said. Renbochin raised his eyebrows. They only produced 8 peaches a year, and half of them were sent over at once. This was indeed a big gift. Master also said that for the next 5 years, he will give you 4 peaches every year. After 5 years, you won't need it anymore. When the Empress heard what the little monk said, she was a little astonished. 10 years and 20 pills, it was indeed not a small amount. After hearing this, Renbochin immediately stopped talking. First, he grabbed a peach and took a bite. A fragrant and sweet taste filled his mouth. The peach was fine and soft, and he swallowed it in 2 or 3 bites. Then, from his stomach, it turned into a warm current that spread to his limbs and bones. His whole body seemed to be in a warm state, and he felt as if he was floating. After swallowing the entire peach, his entire body heated up. He felt waves of heat surging through his body, causing him to be unable to move. The Empress gently patted his back. The warm current in Renbochin's body was immediately dispersed and integrated into his whole body. After Renbochin could move, he felt unbearably thirsty again. The temptation of the 2 remaining peaches on the table was even greater. He couldn't wait to grab one and eat it again, experiencing the same experience as before. However, after the Empress dispersed the warm current in his body, Renbochin's muscles flowed like waves. He felt his whole body was light as a feather, as if he was flying. When he came back to his senses, he was already in the visualization of wood. That metal chain was spinning on the tree trunk in front of him. After a quarter of an hour, Renbochin woke up from the visualization of wood. All the bones in his body made caw-caw sounds. He felt his whole body relax, as if the shackles that had been entangled in his body for a long time had been unlocked. His whole body had become much stronger. He knew that this wasn't an illusion. He had just broken through the visualization of wood. Originally, he could only climb half of the gigantic tree in the visualization of wood. If he practiced normally, he would need at least 3 months. However, these 2 peaches saved him 3 months of hard work and allowed him to break through the first level. This effect could be said to be heaven-defying. At least in that world, there weren't many items that could have such an effect, let alone on Earth. This made Renbochin even more unable to see through Su Wen. In the past, when he worked with the nation, he was very clear that there weren't any supernatural abilities, immortals, or anything like that in this world. Otherwise, the nation wouldn't have treated him like that. He had also confirmed this point during his work with the Messier 87 department. However, Su Wen's various actions and these few peaches made him understand that there was indeed something wrong with this Su Wen. It seemed like he had to meet him. Renbochin thought for a while and looked up at the little monk Xing Ruo. Since the other party had given him such a big gift, if it was just to send the little monk over to preach, there seemed to be no reason for him to reject it. How dare you call Her Majesty by her name? The 2 soldiers in front of the door immediately flew into a rage. They drew their steel swords and slashed at him. However, just as the 2 of them were about 10 meters away from this person, the blind man tapped twice with his bamboo cane in the air. The 2 of them stopped in their tracks and fell to the ground. Fresh blood flowed out from their chests. When such a thing happened outside, there was an immediate uproar in the residence. Tall and big figures jumped out of the residence and slashed at this blind man with gleaming swords. However, this blind man merely tapped the air with his bamboo cane, and the figures fell from the sky one after another. The cause of death was the same. There was a hole in their chests, and their hearts were shattered. In a short period of time, more than 10 people had fallen beside him. However, there were still winged cavalry warriors who heard the news and rushed over from all directions. Even though they saw the corpses on the ground, they weren't afraid at all and silently waved the steel swords in their hands. Shiwanya, who had rushed out after receiving the news, only saw dozens of winged cavalry warriors pouncing on this person. However, this person merely tapped the bamboo cane in his hand, and the winged cavalry warriors immediately lost their lives. Shiwanya immediately shouted angrily, "Where did this scoundrel come from? How dare you? Where is Qi Zixiao?" The blind man said indifferently. His hands didn't stop as he reaped lives after lives. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.